uppercut, try to hit me in the gut, thinking that I won't react. You whispering my name, thinking I won't be the same. Turn fiction into fact. See what you didn't know, bruises that'll never show, slipping on your every jab. So tighten up your fist, step into the ring with this. I hope your mama's got your back. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You didn't bust. Oh, 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 oh. You didn't bust. Oh, oh.
Hey, Nick. Sean Spicer. I understand there's some controversy brewing about how many subscribers you have on YouTube. You have more subscribers than anybody. And it's probably the biggest, largest YouTube subscription that anybody's had. But also, it's not numbers that matter, Nick. And I know everyone's going to quibble over this, but it's content. It's quality. And your subscribers are amazing. They're great. They're high quality subscribers, and that's really what you have to look at. Don't just focus on the numbers. I mean, if people are spewing a bunch of fake news, just don't get in the mud. They're amazing folks. Their engagement, the way that they like the videos. Anyway, I hope this puts this to the end. I hope that this controversy is over, and we know who the real YouTube subscriber champ is, and it's you, Nick.
Photo of you in my mind, on the table under lights. There's no one here but you and I. This neon town is yours and mine. And I said, hey, Caruso. Stayed up through the days and night, laying we watched the world get light. Hey, Caruso. Sunlight, freedom in your eyes. Please don't leave now. Hey, Caruso. Sunlight, freedom in your eyes. Please don't leave now.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. If let's just quickly do a sound check. You guys can hear me, I assume.
I can.
All right. And I think Jim is mute.
I can hear you.
All right. Perfect. Well, and I assume the audience, if anyone can't hear you, they'll let us know. I think for the next couple of shows, a sound check ahead of time may not be a bad thing. Anyways, thank you all for joining us. It's been a little bit of a cray-cray week. The Aubrey case has just taken a sharp turn. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but if they're not convicted, I think things are going to head south in this country pretty quickly. And the same thing with Rittenhouse. So, we'll talk about that if it comes up. But we've got 𝐒𝐴ndring here as always, and we've got Jim from Atheist Edge. Jim, how are you?
I am well, my good sir. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Cricket, tumbleweed.
Yeah. All right. Roger that, Titan. Thank you. All right. So, I'm doing good. And yes, I love that. What is it? The thing with Sean Spicer, who I think doesn't know the first thing about YouTube. He's like, you have the best subscribers. They really know how to hit that like button. It's just like, yeah, they do. Thanks. Oh, dear Lord.
Was that a cameo, Nick?
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't say much to give him a
hilarious.
script, but it was just like, and then he just ran with it. I was just like, okay, great, let's. You have the best subscribership of YouTube. We know it's you.
It was full Trump. He channeled Trump. It was funny.
I just asked that he mentioned fake news. That's it, fake news, and you know who's got the real. And he just ran with it. I was just like, okay, great, thanks. Oh, I really want to do more of those, but I just can't justify the expense. It's just the only one the only one I regret not doing was regret. We can't do this, but Vicente Fox saying, "In time will not pay for no fucking wall." That's I wanted Mexican President Vicente Fox to say that. That's the only one I really want.
Oh God! I hired Todd Glass, the comedian from. He's a stand-up comedian. He's got a few Netflix specials, and it's just maybe 3 minutes, 5 minutes. I just wanted like an intro. Hi, I'm Todd Glass, and you're watching Atheist Edge, right?
Yeah.
In and out, $50, $75, whatever. He went for like 17 minutes. He was drinking scotch. He was just going on how good of friends we were. We've never met. And, well, it was awesome.
Oh, so send me a link to that one. Well, I always like how on this. So Jim hosts Atheist Edge, which you were good enough to have me on a while back for an interview, which was that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing that. Very magnanimous, just a really great time. So that was so you guys interview everybody, and then you've got I'm a huge fan of Noel Plum, who used to hang on the show on In Time, and we used to see him around a lot. Big fan of Noel Plum, and you got him doing sort of that intro, welcome to Atheist Edge and all those. I was like, I'd really like to get those. I still want to get them. I like them. It's just there's always a million things to do on the show, and that just hasn't been a priority for me. But I do want to get more of those. But yeah, I think that's a lot of fun. I got the idea from Amy Newman, who's got Gilbert Gottfried just attacking her viciously. Why would anyone want to watch this? Amy Newman, she doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. He just rails into her for 10 minutes. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, God, that's funny. Yeah, you just reminded me. Mine are getting a little bit stale. So every year or so, I try to refresh, so I reach out to everybody. And I don't have any from you. So I just wrote it down. So after this, I'm going to be hitting you up to say, hey, I'm Nicholas Suter, and you're watching Atheist Edge.
Atheist Edge, okay. Yeah, well, it's it's been a while since I was on, so most people will be like, who the hell is that clown?
When people think of topical current events, atheist news channels, atheist YouTube channels, you're at the top of a very short list.
Yeah, that is a very short list. I'm proud to be at the top of it, but let's be honest, it's a pretty short list. I've seen a couple.
No, I mean it's a niche. It's a niche that you've got a monopoly on. I mean, who's gonna take a run at you? Steve Shives maybe. Cody. Not Dusty Smith. Maybe and as much as we don't get along, but maybe if Non Sequitur ever made a resurrection, who knows? And the rest are drama merchants.
Yeah, I mean, a Non Sequitur, I think would probably. I mean, I think that is something. I think they do like to do sort of cultural, current topic stuff like that. But yeah, if it ever comes back, it won't be, I think, in the same niche per se. But yeah, it's definitely. I think there'll be overlap in audience, and there certainly is between In Time and a number of those other shows. So, but I'm. We'll see if it ever comes back. I oscillate between being optimistic and not. But of course, if it comes back, it won't be what people I think watched it for in the first place. So, I think there was a tension there that people enjoyed that obviously isn't going to be there anymore. So, at least unless Kyle comes on, in which case there's going to be a lot of tension. If
Ooh-wee.
Yeah, if Kyle does come back as co-host on the Non Sequitur show, that'll be, I'll watch. I'll have popcorn. Like, hey guys, let's get this. Yeah. Oh dear Lord. So
if he does it from prison,
yeah,
more so.
He may. He's got a penchant for taking just a small amount of trouble and making it really fucking big. he's got a talent, you want to say, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, cocaine's a hell of a drug. In the immortal words of Dave Chappelle.
Yeah. It's the disc golf dude. Yeah, so that's it. So yeah, I mean, we do, of course, we do breaking news, and we haven't had much occasion to do breaking news recently, which is great. Last year, that's all we were fucking doing. I mean, just last year it was it was pretty crazy. But I think we're preparing. So Kenosha, that it was the governor. I think I've got the thing over here. Just authorized the deployment of National Guard in Kenosha for on the assumption of, and I critical thinking. It doesn't take a tremendous amount of critical thinking, but I get yeah. So. The governor authorizes the deployment of National Guard troops in Kenosha in anticipation of the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. Like, oh, you see, that's proof it's rigged. Because why would he do it unless he knows that they're going to find him not guilty? I'm like, because there's a possibility. Let's assume for a second it wasn't rigged and he doesn't know what the verdict's going to be. He's going to deploy oh my God, he's deploying the troops because if Rittenhouse is found not guilty, there's going to be a lot of pissed off people. And the funny thing is, it's not Rittenhouse's fault, it's the media's fault. It's utterly insane.
What's the highest chance of violence in the streets if he's found not guilty or guilty? Do you think?
If he's found guilty, that's a good. If he's found guilty, probably not a huge chance of violence in the streets. There'll be some right wingers who are going to be pissed off, but I don't think they're going to protest. If he's found not guilty, chances of at least protests, 98%. I'd say them being violent is probably 90 to 95%, or at least there being violence in them. I think would be my, that's what I'm thinking. He has to deploy the National Guard. People are going to be pissed if he's found not guilty. So one of the problems is, and we did the show. And I was telling you about this on Tuesday. We did a show. I'm really proud of this. We just covered it beginning to end, and it starts with the shooting of, oh dear Lord, I've forgotten his name, but it was a black man. He actually, I'm so used to saying an unarmed black man. He was armed with a knife, but he was shot and killed. And then there were riots in Kenosha. On the third day of rioting, he showed up. He had an AR-15, and people say, well, he's obviously looking for trouble. Other people say, well, no, he wasn't. But when all was said and done, he shot and killed 2 people and pretty badly injured a third. And but what's been happening is the media, reputable news sources, and we played Young Turks, who have 4 million subscribers, and the day of the trial, they were like, he went down there to kill black people. And all these conservatives are sitting there saying, yay, yay. Now, he didn't kill any black people. He killed 2 white people, but at least he killed someone. Yay, yay. And I was just like, I don't think there's anybody who can reasonably look at that, who can sit there and say that's why he went down there. And, but the news media, everybody wants views. Everybody wants eyeballs. So they hype it up. And the worst possible interpretation of all the evidence is, and I just got into it with some guy who said, yeah, he went down there to kill a whole bunch of people, knowing he would probably get killed himself. And I was just like, what makes you say that? Well, why would he write a suicide note if he hadn't done that? I was like, suicide note? He didn't write a suicide note. There's nobody in the press. This is the first I've heard of it. It's been a year. I've never heard of a suicide note. What? Yeah, Jacob Blake, that was it. Thank you.
Right-wingers are not necessarily racist. And the left needs to understand that. You cannot automatically dump the racist label on all the right-wing extremists. It's innocent until proven guilty. Now, every racist person I've ever met in my life in the last 5 years is a right-wing conservative. That's true. But that doesn't mean all right-wing conservatives are racist. All giraffes are mammals, but not all mammals are giraffes.
Well, and I think also you need to realize that the left has its extremists too. The number one, I think it's the number one terrorist organization in the world is Greenpeace. I mean, it's a left-wing organization, but they do a tremendous amount of damage, and people die in what they're doing. And okay, they're trying to save the planet. Okay, that's right-wingers are trying to save this country or whatever it is they're trying to do. So there are extremists on each side. The type of extremists are different, but there really are, and you have.
Yeah.
It's not going to help.
Flint, Michigan, Seattle, Portland. What's the Evergreen State College?
Yeah,
Oh,
Evergreen.
Man,
Yeah.
I mean, there's some. Yeah.
Which is hilarious. I really, and I saw of all the news coverage I've seen of Evergreen, which is hilarious, the one that was probably the best, and it was still pretty bad, it was faulty. But the one that was the best was, well, no, actually, no, I'm phrasing this wrong. Of all the organizations, news organizations that covered Evergreen, the one that did it the best was Fox News. Now, they misrepresented it. They steered hard into it and said, this is what happens when you have liberals in charge. This is a liberal problem, all this other stuff, and none of which is true. But they were the only ones covering it. So I got to say they were the best because CNN didn't have it, ABC didn't have it, and I was just like, this is big news. If this had happened to that religious college that's not accredited, but everybody says is, it's Jim, or not, I want to say Jim Jones. No, it's this university. But I mean, if this had happened at a right-leaning
Liberty University.
What?
Oral Roberts. Liberty University, or
Maybe.
Oral Roberts, or Brigham Young.
If it had happened at one of those places, the left wing media would have been all over it, and it's sort of like, but it happened at Evergreen, so people are like, we're gonna, and when you see, we did a show on that, and it was just like, when I really saw what happened over there, I was just like, this is disturbing. It's genuinely disturbing, and so I mean, I think
any protests / potential riots that start with crowds snapping instead of clapping, I perk up. I'm like, oh, okay. They've identified themselves. Let's see what happens. Grab the popcorn.
Yeah,
that's so wrong.
Well,
but when they snap instead of clap, because they don't want to create. If you have PTSD, the actual sound of clapping could trigger.
Really?
I mean, come on. They're extreme. Yes. You ever seen that? The crowds will snap instead of clap.
I've seen it. I didn't realize
it's a very left wing. It's just a way to identify. You're right, though, Nick. There are left wing extremists just as there are right wing, and the rational position is to be, somewhere either left of center or right of center. And that doesn't mean everyone accuses me, left of center centrist, of being indifferent or ambiguous. No, I have I'm very outspoken about all the issues, except that my issues do not fall into one particular category. Therefore, they keep me in the center. But it doesn't mean I'm indifferent.
Yeah, well, and I think also there's something to be said for. Here's the other thing. I try to be as educated as I can be on any topic in which I'm going to engage. And so people are sitting there going, well, this happened, why aren't you engaging? It's like, well, because the amount of time it's going to take for me to get to the point where I feel I'm going to be able to speak saliently on it exceeds the amount of spare time I have right now. I can't engage on every single topic I see. And the more times I do engage on anything seriously, the more I realize, yep, I'm really glad I bothered to learn it and to see what's going on, because this stuff none of this is easy, and there's huge nuance. And I really thought, I thought the worst of Rittenhouse, and whether or not you think he should be found guilty or not, one thing is certain: what the vast majority of the news media has been saying of him is false, flatly false, and they seem to have gotten it under control now that he's having a trial, although they're still being vicious to him. But at least now they're not saying things that are just patently, completely, wholly false. He went down there. He went down there to kill black people. It was pretty friggin' egregious. And then people hear that, they buy it, and then if he gets off, like, wait, you're going to let off somebody who just went down there to kill black people? No. Nobody has said that in the trial. Nobody has said, even suggested, and the prosecution would get thrown out of court if they tried to say that. This is not true.
I feel fortunate I came on the right night, because my ignorance might be something to add to this conversation, because I know that Rittenhouse is on trial, and I know he was a minor in possession of an assault rifle across state lines which is a felony. A minor with a assault rifle is a felony, and not having a license to carry is a felony. There's 3 felonies. As to whether what his mens rea, his criminal intent at the time of the killings, I'm totally ignorant. I don't know the circumstances. I have not seen any video. I know that he seems to be guilty on at least 3 felony counts. I don't know if he's even being charged as an adult.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, how did you hear about those the carrying the gun across state lines and felonies there?
Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to full disclosure. I'm a Rachel Maddow addict, so I probably got it off of MSNBC.
So okay, yeah, none of that's true. Let's figure out what is true. I mean, that's the appropriate. Yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about. None of that's true.
No. Really?
So, yeah.
Okay, enlighten me.
All right. So he did have an AR-15, which in fact it appears did own. Now, in the state, he is in fact allowed to own an AR-15. He can't buy one, but he is allowed to own one. Somebody else is going to have to buy it for him. He can't own a pistol, by the way. Can't own a pistol, but he can own an AR-15. And the reason is there's a hunting exception. And if you get a specific training for hunting and a hunting license at the age of 17 and a half, he can legally own one. So he did, in fact, legally own this weapon. He followed he got the hunting license. He followed the law. It was purchased the way it needs to be purchased such that he can own it. And it was stored at his uncle's house, which is where it would need to be stored to make it legal. Now, whether or not he can then carry it outside and just hang with it is another thing, but the law doesn't say he can't. Now, it's probably an oversight, but at a minimum, the violation of him carrying that around is a misdemeanor because he did, in fact, legally own it. And because it was stored at his uncle's house in Kenosha, he did not cross state lines with it. Now, he did live across state lines, but he worked at and near Kenosha. So he crossed into Kenosha all the time. And it's sort of like, if you live, and I lived at one point really close to I was in New Hampshire, but I had to go into Massachusetts every day, and it was a 15-minute drive. It didn't cross my mind that I'm crossing into another state. You just go. It's ubiquitous. You just go back and forth. He lived 15 minutes from there and was in Kenosha every day for work. And that's where his uncle lived, and that's usually where he went hunting. So he wasn't a stranger to Kenosha. But at a minimum, all of those felonies off the table. He is charged with 1 misdemeanor count for that rifle. So that's very important to realize because other people sit there and say, well, he had this rifle and all these felonies. Yeah, because when we start talking about self-defense, if he was doing a whole bunch of other felonies, that might be one thing. But he's got a misdemeanor at most for that one. So what happened was this. He was a lifeguard. He had received some extra training for some EMT training. It doesn't look like he was a formal EMT, but he had received at least some of the training. And he was into Blue Lives Matter, and he had asked people to help raise money for police officer causes, including humanizing the badge. When the protests started across the country, but in Kenosha they turned violent. They turned pretty seriously violent. A lot of property was getting burned. There were people getting injured. So on the day that this happened, he went and was washing graffiti off of the local high school. So he's sitting there volunteering. So he seemed to really genuinely care about. Now, I do think there's a little bit of the I'm Batman kind of complex. So we'll get into that. And he's 17 years old. But that night he decides he is going to protect properties that have been burned down, properties like his uncle's. He did not, in fact, protect his uncle's, but that was he had voiced as a concern. He shows up there with the AR-15. And he says, I'm here to help. I'm going to offer, medical services. I'm going to make sure nobody does any damage and keep everybody safe. He does offer EMT services for a little while. Meanwhile, there's a guy named Rosenbaum. Rosenbaum is genuinely unhinged. We showed footage of this. He had just been released from a mental hospital that day. He had an extensive criminal record. Now, of course, Rittenhouse had no way of knowing this, but he was a very it's crystal clear that he appears to be a rather violent human being, and he was trying to start a lot of fights. People were holding him back, and he actually started to get into a fight with somebody who looked very similar to Rittenhouse. Same color pants, same color shirt, same kind of rifle. Though, I mean, if you're not an expert in rifles, they look identical. And so this was all at a gas station. Somebody takes a dumpster, lights it on fire, and tries to ram it into the gas station to blow the gas station up. A guard puts it out. Then Rosenbaum starts lighting a whole bunch of fires, lights another gas station, tries to put it out. And it was either, I forget whether it was Rittenhouse or the guy who looks like him, but one of them was involved in putting that fire and several other fires out. So by this point, he shows up. He grabs a fire extinguisher and he starts going up the road when he hears that there is a damage being done to a parking, well, it's not parking, I guess it's a car dealership of some kind. As he's on his way, he passes Rosenbaum. Rosenbaum sees him, hauls ass after him. Now, Rosenbaum had already by this point said, if I ever get you alone, I'm going to fucking kill you. He also stood up on a bunch of cars and said, I'm going to cut your motherfucking heart out. And he was yelling, screaming. He was combative with absolutely everybody. Sees Rittenhouse, chases after Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse runs. Now, Rittenhouse has an AR-14. At this point, he can defend himself. He chooses to run. He finally gets cornered. Rosenbaum catches up with him, reaches for the rifle. Rittenhouse fires 4 shots. It appears all of them hit, and he kills Rosenbaum. At this point, the crowd starts to say, oh my God, you shot so why'd you shoot him? Who shot? Everybody shot him. So a large crowd starts chasing him. He runs and sees a line of police and decides he's going to make a beeline for the police officers. Everybody sees him. There's lights, there's a hole, and there's just a whole line down at as he's on his way, somebody hits him, somebody's pushing him, they're trying to knock him over. He trips and falls, actually. He turns around, aims his gun at the crowd to try to get them to not come up and go at him. Guy with a skateboard whacks him with the skateboard, tries to hit him right on the neck with the edge of the skateboard. He ends up shooting, and I think if I recall, it's the kid with the skateboard, hits him in the heart and kills him essentially instantly. Another person comes up, sort of backs away, and then when Rittenhouse is messing with his weapon, comes up with I want to say a Glock. I think it was a Glock with an extended magazine, aims it at Rittenhouse's head. Rittenhouse gets off a shot and basically does severe damage to this person's arm. Rittenhouse gets back up again, runs all the way to the line, making sure that the crowd stays back, and then attempts to surrender to police. They actually didn't accept the surrender. They didn't realize he was in trouble for anything. So yep. All right. So, what was I gonna say? So, and then that's it. So that's, and then he surrendered to the police, and that was, I want to say about a year ago. I don't know. It's got to be closer to 6 months ago. So that's what happened.
So someone in the crowd had a pistol as well. So there's that to look into if they were authorized if they had a license to carry for that. But a lot of things come to mind. First off, use of deadly force in my state, deadly force is authorized by civilians in many cases in the commission of a felony. I don't know if arson is one of those cases where it's authorized, but that's worth looking into. Ownership of a weapon, just like you alluded to, does not equal a license to carry outside of your home. So that's a state by state. Also, there's state reciprocity. If he was in one state, he could be fully licensed. If I went to Oklahoma, I would have to check with Oklahoma before I took my semi-automatic pistol to another state. The other thing is, if anything he did was felonious, the possession of the rifle across state lines or being a minor, if any of those were felonious, you're saying they weren't. But if he was in the active commission of a felony at any point during this, anything he does automatically becomes a felony. Like when someone robs a bank, they're in the commission of a felony. Even if you're the getaway driver, if one of your accomplices inside the bank kills a civilian, that getaway driver gets the same penalty. They get the same punishment.
But here's the interesting thing, though. If you are reasonably in fear for your life, even if you're in the commission of a crime, and I forget, I can look up the actual statute for this, even if you're in the commission of a felony, if you have a reasonable fear for your life, you can still defend yourself despite the fact that you're in the process of committing a crime. You still have to face the consequences of the other crimes, but just
charge.
because you're engaged in a crime does not mean that you cannot use self-defense. So that's I think
that gets sticky, doesn't it?
Yeah, Pat, how are you?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks. What's going on?
I thought I'd jump in before you made any more factual errors on the case, so you don't get embarrassed later.
Okay. Well, I'm always embarrassed, but yeah, sure. I'd love to hear the.
The weapon Rittenhouse was carrying was a Smith & Wesson AR-15 frame, not an AR-14. I don't know why you keep saying that, because you're confusing M14 and AR-15. For those
I knew what he was saying.
Weapons.
Yeah.
Well,
I
I
know,
was thinking AR-15.
Other people are just going, he's got this East Coast liberal talking about firearms like he knows what he's talking about.
Xander will tell you, I used to say AR-14 as a joke. To hit up on that, and now if I'm tired, my brain goes right back to I said AR-15 style correctly, I think, the first time, and then I've just been botching it since then. But I say, and then the other one I do is AR-47. But at any rate, yeah, I think when we're talking about this seriously, I need to make sure. So thank you for that. You're absolutely right.
And AR-15 is a civilian version of the M4 military version, which is the only difference is the AR-15 is semi-automatic. The M14, I mean the M4 in the military has on the safety, it has safe,
Selective fire
it
switch.
has semi-automatic, and the third option, which is unique to the M4, is a 3-round burst. That's the only difference.
All right. So how else have I been embarrassing myself? Please enlighten me.
Well, so you made a statement about use of a weapon in the commission of a misdemeanor. So if you're in the commission of a misdemeanor and what you do, this is where a lot of states have wobblers. So if you're armed when you're committing a misdemeanor, it becomes a felony regardless. Every state's different. And not every state has wobblers. So in many cases, what I would normally do is a misdemeanor. If even a misdemeanor occurs, but I was armed when I committed it, even if that's tangential to the crime I do. For example, I commit simple assault while carrying a firearm in some states. That makes it a felony just for the fact that I was in possession of a firearm, even if it wasn't pertinent and germane to the commission of the misdemeanor that I committed. So, every state's different. So that's one of the things. There's going to be a lot of nuance in this case about state law. Like, that's the problem, is unless we really have attorneys on from those states, we won't know the actual parameters, the walls that are framed within the legal defense. Like in some states, there's the imperfect defense rule, right? So you're not guilty of first degree or second degree, but you're guilty of manslaughter because you have an imperfect self-defense. You overcompensate in what would be considered reasonable in your defense, and for that reason you can be guilty of manslaughter under an imperfect self-defense rule, which I think, if I was analyzing this case, and again, I don't practice law, but based on my experience, I would think the prosecution should have went for the imperfect self-defense. That Rittenhouse had a right to protect himself against what was seen as reasonably foreseeable actions. And then the other issue is, who is the primary aggressor in the incident if you walk towards someone while carrying a rifle if someone's acting erratic? You have no duty, unlike law enforcement. Law enforcement generally, not every state, but generally, many states, law enforcement has a duty and obligation to respond. So the old adage is civilians can run away while cops run at stuff, right? That's just kind of the adage. So Rittenhouse had no obligation, not that he doesn't have an allowance for it, but he had no obligation to approach and engage, right? And engage being whatever you want to term it as, but confront, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, if you approach someone, and even if though they're acting belligerent and crazy or mentally unbalanced, do you have an obligation to confront them? Well, I would say in law enforcement anyways, the answer would be yes. Medical personnel that are, licensed by the state and, sworn uniform personnel, first responders, you have an obligation, right? Public safety. Civilians have a very gray line when they start quoting public safety because they have no mandate usually by state law or state constitution, right? If it's not codified in the Constitution, it's usually codified within the bodies of the laws of the state. So I again, not my state. I would feel much more comfortable giving commentary if this was the state of California. But I think that, I don't think Rittenhouse is going to be found guilty of murder in either case.
I don't think so either, but I will just a couple of points. So that it's because of the weapon. He actually is on felony murder because of that weapon, but the misdemeanor is carrying the weapon. But because the assault rifle was used in it's felony murder. But if for the defense, just for was this self-defense or not, that it's felony murder is completely irrelevant. Felony murder is just going to pan out as to what he gets for a punishment if he is convicted. But in terms of is this for the claim of self-defense, it doesn't matter whether it's felony murder or just murder. But the other thing is in all cases,
to be clear, felony murder the felony murder rule is different than felony murder. Felony murder rule is what Atheist Edge was talking about before. I'm the driver of a getaway car. Well, and it's reasonably foreseeable, even if it's not reasonably foreseeable, and there's no plan or intent for one of my accomplices to, they're taking a gun to the bank, but you don't know they're going to shoot anybody. They end up committing murder during commission. Felony murder rule means that I'm equally and culpable, even if we have a plan where we're not going to shoot anybody, or even if I don't know that one of my co-conspirators is, the agreement is you're going to carry a knife, but one of them carries a gun and they shoot someone. Felony murder still applies because it's reasonable, foreseeable, or implied that during the commission of a felony, in this case robbery, it would be that someone's going to get hurt and or injured. So felony murder would apply, and that's the felony murder rule. Not every state has a felony murder rule anymore. Some states have moved away from it, but it used to be ubiquitous throughout the country.
And my state has a stand your ground rule, stand your ground law. I don't know if Wisconsin has that, but would that factor in?
Well, the few stand your ground laws that I've studied, Florida being one of them. The issue is every state's allowed to define their stand your ground law. Some states define it as on the curtilage of your property, like on your property, you're allowed to stand your ground, even though you're not in the interior or the, what we'd call the castle of your home, right? Some states basically say you can't even defend your front yard. Like you have to be in your home or dwelling for it to be, quote unquote, a stand your ground issue. The sacrosanctness of a home versus violent intrusion. And that has to do with the implied threat, right? So there's every state has different case law that kind of falls under this. Like, so example, in one state, someone is 3:00 in the morning, they're pounding on your door, they punch through your window of your door and you see them jimmying your lock and all you see is a hand and you shoot them. In some states, I guarantee you're not going to be found guilty of murder. In some states, you're going to get charged, right? Because some states interpret that, basically until they cross the threshold of your home and identify themselves as an actual threat. Again, I can just tell you most states' laws are the perceived nature of the threat is what the determinative role is. So like in California, someone's just kicked in your back door of your house, they're coming in. You don't have to see a firearm. You don't have to see a weapon. You're justified to use lethal force in most cases. And I say most cases, so those of you in California, I'm not providing legal advice. I'm giving you a summary of how it's implied by most district attorneys in the state of California.
Well, I did want to point out one other thing, though, which is in every case where Rittenhouse fired the weapon, he was actually running away from the people that he fired it at, and they were able to either catch up with him or actually struck him. So in no case that I can tell was he the aggressor. Now, you can argue either brandishing or that he was somehow just by habit, but in no case was he actually the aggressor.
See, that's Nick, I'll actually push back. If I approach you, the issue under the law is primary aggressor, right? So who precipitates the incident? So if I walk up to you and do something to, let's just say I punch you in the face, and then I realize, wow, you're a lot bigger than me and you look like you know how to fight because I didn't knock you down in one punch, and I start running away, and you catch up to me and you start hitting me, and then I pull a gun out of my waistband and shoot you, I'm still the primary aggressor in that incident.
But
that seems to be what the real debate. If you notice the prosecution, they're trying to paint a picture where through thought, word, and mental attitude, Rittenhouse was the primary aggressor. They're trying to show that he went there with the intent to seek confrontation, which then brings into question a self-defense plea or a self-defense defense.
But what I think the problem I think with that is, like, for example, with Rosenbaum, to start with Rosenbaum, he passed Rosenbaum, and he, other than Rosenbaum threatening to kill him several times, he had no significant engagement with Rosenbaum. He didn't even, if he was aware that he had passed Rosenbaum, I haven't heard, but he passed Rosenbaum. He was about 20 or 30 feet ahead of him, and then Rosenbaum just hauls ass after him, and since at that point, he's even if there had been a previous confrontation, which again seems to have been precipitated by Rosenbaum and by him setting the fires and what's his name putting them out. Once there's that 20 feet distance, he's created a new incident by actually just going after Rittenhouse, who at that point just has his rifle and has a fire extinguisher. So, and then at that point, again, that's where he runs, and it's only when is there any way that he's not that Rosenbaum's not the aggressor there?
No, so every one of these incidents is going to be different because each one is finite in time. And that's the other thing too, is each time Rittenhouse, pulls the trigger, so to speak, you have to, and I think the prosecution is really trying to present a picture where these are the incidents, trying to keep the counts separate, trying to get into Rittenhouse's state of mind, because without some type of state of mind, we're not going to go any further in this case. I do think that the prosecution in this place had a hard. I don't think this was going to be an easy case to prosecute. I would not have wanted to have been one of the lead investigating officers on this case, particularly given the high profile and political nature of everything involved. I think it was from the very beginning, I thought it was going to be very hard to, as fact patterns came out in different court proceedings, particularly like extradition and different things, if you were paying attention back then, the fact pattern was lining up to Rittenhouse probably being able to get away with, and even back then, early on, was going to not get away with, that's not fair, was going to have a reasonable defense asserted for self-defense in one, if not two, of these incidents from very beginning. Like, if we're just talking about Rosenbaum, I as a lead investigator would not have taken Rittenhouse into custody on that fact pattern. Like, I would have recommended the DA not file charges. That's just me. Based on my experience?
Have you noticed a difference between what we're seeing in court and what we also saw in the video and what the news media? We played that bit from the Young Turks, which seems to me to be unexcusable, but we acknowledged, look, that's far left, okay? One reason we used it was to give you an example of what the furthest out there is, but even John Oliver and a bunch of others seem to have not.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, this is the conflation. So, I'm going to go out on a ledge and let you know I'm a former law enforcement officer that considers myself in the left. But what I can do for the left is I can put on my law enforcement hat, right? Use my experience and training and all of my expertise to try to give you what I think the reasonable middle road would be. Now, understand, I'm already biased towards the left, so I have to moderate, what I'm saying. But I think from the very beginning, if you're leaning towards acquitting Rittenhouse as an investigator because you wanted to be self-defense, I think that would have been a very easy fact pattern to put together for Rosenbaum. But if you're trying to prosecute this case, I think certain fact patterns are problematic. Rosenbaum pursuing him and already having displayed violent tendencies that other people can attest to. And again, there's bias in every one of these witnesses. In my career, I saw very few neutral witnesses. And what I mean by that is truly neutral. People that didn't already have some preconceived notions that affect their interpretation of what they're observing. right? And people go, well, how do you say that, Pat? You saw, you had hundreds and literally thousands of witnesses you interviewed in your career. Well, yeah, but everybody would say, oh, I don't like that, or well, that person always causes problems, or that's typically some of the problems with these issues, is that it becomes very difficult to look at this, and again, the detectives on the scene, and those, I know the predisposition to go, the cops were already lined up against the protesters. I agree. Whether or not law enforcement should have done a better job of separating those two groups is a legitimate critique. The fact that they allowed, I would, being a defender of private property, self-appointed, that vigilante and provocateur are all kind of open to interpretation.
Hi, hey, Simos, welcome. Thank you. Wow, I almost called you Samos.
Hello.
Wow. Simos,
That's
welcome.
okay.
Is Andrew? Yeah, it's just I'm more tired than I thought I was. So, thank you guys for joining us. So, Jim, Atheist Edge here had asked, and he didn't know much about it, and his initial assessment, I found some faults with. So we've just been talking about it. But what are your guys' thoughts on this?
Well, I don't have a lot. Certainly, I couldn't comment on the legal aspect or etc. From over the other side of the world, it looks bizarre that such a young man can get hold of a weapon like this and then attend something as inflammatory as a demonstration like that, and that him not be checked up at some point by police that see a young man like that walking around with such a weapon, But of course, I'm from a country where handguns are banned, so I wouldn't expect it to be, I wouldn't expect it to go any other way. The only thing I would say that I've kind of noticed, I've been watching Nate's streams, of course, and trying to keep up with the case, but obviously the law is very different from where I am, so I couldn't comment on that. But this right versus left polarization that this case seems to bring up does seem to me worrying. I didn't take either side to be necessarily politically engaged in the topic in a deep way, and yet it seems to me that both sides have been put forward as representative of a political divide, and I find that very worrying, especially in a legal case like this where people have lost their lives, and it shouldn't really be about the politics necessarily. It's about the state of the law. So that's the only thing I would kind of say. It does seem to me worrying that people just want to hijack the case for some political agenda, although maybe we should expect that in the modern world rather than maybe I'm just trying to be too pussy about it.
Well, I think
so that's the only thing I would say.
I think you're going to get a little bit of that in any case, and DAs have to be elected in most districts, and judges on occasion have to be elected. There's so there's going to be politics to it. But this, I have wondered, if you're in the jury and you say to yourself, well, I think, okay, I have reasonable doubt. I'm not filled with doubts. I'm not made of doubts, but I've got reasonable doubt. But if we let him go, there may be rioting and more loss of life. So, is there going to be anyone in there who's going to sit there and say, for the sake of keeping peace, we just have to convict him?
Yeah, that's got to be wrong, though, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Just on the face of it, that doesn't sound right to say that because of the political outcome, justice should be changed. That doesn't sound right. I mean, he's clearly guilty. I mean, as far as I can make out, he's clearly guilty of at least owning a weapon. Both of those two people, I can't remember the guy's name, the guy that was playing medic, and the young guy with the gun. Both of those two seem to have illegal weapons on them in some respects. So, they both got to be guilty of something. But obviously, the charges that they're going for, I couldn't comment on.
You'll be proud of your brothers across the pond. It's a misdemeanor for Rittenhouse. the AR-15 style weapon.
Wow.
It's a misdemeanor.
Is he getting tried as an adult? He was 17 at the time, right?
17 and a half. I honestly don't even know. I don't know. I would assume so. I haven't heard that he was. I don't think he was. Well, and what I saw said that he. I think he is. He's got to be. I honestly don't know. You'd think.
Yeah, if he were being charged. Yeah, if he were being charged as a minor, they wouldn't be televising the trial.
Well,
Presumably, though, this will affect what weapons he can get hold of in the future, will it?
Well, it depends on the state. Nick was saying earlier that even minors, they have a hunting provision, to carry rifles but not pistols.
So that's how we got the.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I was going to point out.
I'll shut up for a
Wisconsin state law. Oh, I am on Wisconsin. Kyle was charged with possession of a dangerous weapon by a person under 18. That's 948.60. There's 3 sections to it. The first goes through and does some definitions and things like that. But however, Part 3 is exceptions to this. Part 3C says this section applies only to persons under 18 years of age who possess or is armed with a rifle or a shotgun if the person is in violation of statute 941.28, which is the prohibition against short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns, or is not in compliance with state statute 29.304 and 29.593, which are both hunting regulations stating that a person under the age of 18 may carry a rifle provided they have successfully completed a hunter safety course.
Or a shotgun, rifle or a shotgun. So they can't have a pistol, but they can have a rifle or a shotgun.
Right. So the possession of a dangerous weapon by a person under 18 does not apply to somebody who's carrying a legal length rifle and has completed a hunter safety course. So that one's going to be a very interesting one to see how it's adjudicated, because that is exactly what the law says. They don't specifically say, the law does not specifically say that you must be engaged in hunting for this to apply. So I'm very curious as to how they're going to decide that one. And then one of the points on self-defense is on the presumption, provocation, whether it affects the privilege of self-defense. And Wisconsin state law does have in 939.48 self-defense and defense of others. Section 2A says a person who engages in unlawful conduct of a type likely to provoke others to attack him or her.
Oh, Xandering's been yeah, but yeah, I know the code he's talking about, and it says yep, we lost Xandering. The code that he's talking about basically says that they at first it appears to suggest that self-defense is not viable, and then it says actually self-defense can be used even in a situation where they provoked, if they are in reasonable fear for their lives. If I remember the statute correctly, I think that's the one he's quoting. Hey, welcome back.
On my back, I'm trying to figure out if I've got internet service or not.
Yeah.
I hear you.
You booted. I got you back. So you were quoting the.
You probably already talked about this.
I can't understand what any of you guys are saying, so I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I was just reading the provision. Yeah, I was just reading the provision on provocation. You can provoke a fight and still be entitled to self-defense if you tried to disengage from that fight. So the example used, I walk up and punch you in the face, you turn around and stand up, and oh shit, you're 8 feet tall and almost that wide, and I go, crap, I'm really sorry, and I start backing away. It's like, I don't want any part of that, I'm really sorry, and he decides he's going to pick me up by the throat and start choking me out. I have every right under Wisconsin law to pull my gun and shoot him in self-defense. And it is completely covered. Even though I started the fight, I clearly made my intentions clear to withdraw from the fight and not continue it. And he used something that was likely to cause, serious bodily injury or harm. He's choking me out. yeah, I can
that's-
still
he has
use
to
deadly
cross that.
force to protect myself.
He has to cross that threshold, but even on the provocation, yeah, that was my, yeah.
But didn't he come across state
Yeah,
lines?
now-
He lived out of state, right?
Yeah, but he broke
That
the
has
law.
absolutely
and
nothing to do with it.
I think he's asking because of where the law was broken. I think Jim's question, if I understand correctly, is should the laws in his home state apply, or the laws where he broke the law? It's the laws where he was at the time he broke the laws that apply.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Right, and whether he was a resident of the state or not doesn't matter.
But the
It's where you broke the law.
Is the disengagement is also balanced with the right to defense, right? So disengagement has to be clear. I also, as you punching me in the face, I have a right then to commit and undertake, defense of myself. And if you're armed while you're punching me, the likelihood of you re-engaging and preventing an additional threat to me is also something considered in the fact pattern. Saying you had a right to, then, like in your scenario, I have a right to pull out my gun because I'm being choked out. That's interpretive based on the fact that I have a right to apprehend and detain you for the police. So you're gonna have to prove for your self-defense to be viable that you were in clear and demonstrable ultimate and imminent threat of your life. Saying, well, he came after me may not be enough for a
it gets muddy fast.
That's why, right? It does, definitely.
But in the case of with all the video that we have of Kyle Rittenhouse, at no point did I ever see Kyle Rittenhouse be the aggressor in anything. At all times, he was trying to get away. And what started the whole thing, the only reason that he really turned around was the guy that shot the gun into the air. I mean, Kyle's running away, Rosenbaum's hot on his heels, and somebody not 10, 15 feet behind them points a gun up into the air and fires around. And right after that is when Rittenhouse turns around, sees Rosenbaum directly on top of him, begins lunging for what, according to the report, McGinnis, lunging for his rifle and said, "Fuck you," and that's the point at which Rittenhouse fires his gun. And after that, he calls someone. He's hanging around. He didn't immediately take off. It wasn't until the crowd coming from the north coming down, and then people start yelling, "Hey, you just shot that guy, get him." He takes off towards police, and is running, and at that point is running away from everybody at that point. And well, from the moment that video starts all the way through to the end, he is running away from everybody. I don't see how he could be seen as an aggressor if anybody actually watches that video.
For that fact pattern, I would agree. But did he have a right to then fire at people as he was running away, who were then? He would never. This is the problem: is when someone tried to hit him with the skateboard. Was that person?
Yeah, he was on his back.
What they saw, the defense was
doesn't matter.
The defense of others, because
that doesn't matter.
You say it doesn't matter, like it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter to Kyle.
Hold on. I do want to let.
But his defense has to be reasonable.
Listen.
So his defense has to be reasonable. If I say, "Give me your gun," because you've just shot someone and you refuse to send your weapon, you may not be actually defending yourself. Disarmament is not, this is the problem when civilians start engaging in law enforcement related and self-defense activities and want to use, again, the hard letter of the law is going to be interpretive in this. If you hear a gun go off and I'm your neighbor and I see you standing outside with your gun and I point a gun at you, are you justified to shoot me? Because I'm justified to point my gun at you because you're standing here in front with a firearm and we heard firearms going off. So we're going to start doing the self-defense spider web, right? And in a fact pattern, go, well, Pat was pointing a gun at me, so I was justified in pointing my gun at him and discharging it because I was an imminent threat for my safety. But I was an imminent threat for my safety because we just had guns go off in front of our house. This is where the problem gets when some of these states have nebulous laws on how self-defense can be interpreted and when does self-defense begin and the right of a citizen to protect the safety, engage in citizens arrest, maintaining their own safety and the defense of others, right? This is where it gets really muddy real fast. Was I justified at swinging at you with a skateboard when I just saw you shoot someone with a rifle?
But nobody there saw him do. Nobody there saw him do it. No, all anyone did was
Right. I'm saying I'm changing the fact pattern to make it more condensed in time to say that it gets very muddy very fast.
I
But to
agree
just
that
say
it can get
he was
muddy very
justified.
fast.
Justification is something for a jury to determine, not for us sitting. Hey, we don't have a complete and full video account. There's breaks in the video timeline. Like, I would love to have a videotape from 360 degrees, and then I could be more than comfortable to comment that it's going to be X or Z based on my training experience. But we don't, and we also have highly, I would say, from moderately to highly biased witness statements.
Right, but I would also say that from the point that we see Rittenhouse running away from Rosenbaum, running into that car lot, from that point all the way until he runs to the actual police, there is video covering every single second of that. And if there is a gap, then it's like a second when he's crossing out of the lot and onto the actual street. I think you actually lose sight of him, but there's video coverage of the entire event from start to finish. And the reason I say that it doesn't, I'm talking about from whether Kyle Rittenhouse is justified in claiming self-defense. That's not to say that any of the other people who attacked him necessarily would be charged either, because they probably could make the claim to the defense of others. And I agree that that when you start getting those 2 points of view, it can start getting pretty muddy pretty fast. And I'm not a lawyer. I have worked in a very limited capacity as in law enforcement, in the Navy Master Arms. That's it.
That was one of the things that really worried me, was that as he's running down the road, allegedly going towards the police, someone shouts out, "That guy shot someone."
Yeah.
Right now, that can't have been a true statement for that person to say that they know that was the case, can it? So clearly, the guy that attacks him with the skateboard is reacting to what other people are saying. So if I was in that person's position, I would be very, very worried about mob justice right there.
Well, and people were also telling them to cranium him, and they were shouting to do damage to him to stop him, not just.
Can I say one thing on that? Because I think this is an interesting thing that Pat brought up that I had thought about before. We've been saying, like, this issue of self-defense, like throughout this whole case, is about what was Rittenhouse thinking? What was he thinking that he was in fear for his life? And so that's a very difficult thing to kind of figure out. But that's kind of what's like we're going to a mindset. So if you break out these things, we think about the interaction with Rosenbaum, and then we think about the other interactions. If we go to the second portions of the interactions, you could say, well, like Simos, like you were saying, these guys heard, hey, he shot him. They all heard gunfire. They hear a bunch of people saying that this guy shot him. And then there are multiple people that kind of like try to subdue the guy, like in whatever manner, kick him. And I'm not saying that's appropriate or not, but they had a mindset that this guy shot somebody, which he actually did, even if they don't know it. They heard that, and they are like, I feel inclined to stop this person. So I'm not saying it's not that Rittenhouse wasn't acting in self-defense in that case. I'm saying it makes it kind of complicated, given the fact that these people are like, have a perspective that this is an active shooter, and they try to subdue him, and he shoots them and kills them. Like it's a very complicated situation. And I'm not saying it's just so clean cut self-defense. For the first part, the Rosenbaum one, I still don't think that's self-defense in some respects, but I think it's even murkier. And so I could see how you can make a case for that, given what you were saying is Andring and what you and Nick have talked about on before. But I think it almost requires kind of breaking this out between the Rosenbaum piece and then the other piece, because after the fact, it's a lot more nebulous, I think, in terms of that topic. So I'll stop there. But
you run into conflicting views between the two parties, and it is possible to run into a situation where both parties can, by lawfully be acting in self-defense. And they're acting against each other. So, that gets really muddy really fast. And, it's like, as to what was Kyle thinking? Well, he told us what he was thinking. Now, whether you believe him or not, he straight up said that he was in fear for his life. And I don't see anything that happened in any of the video evidence we have, and we have an amazing amount of it, that would contradict his statement that he was in fear for his life in those situations. I still don't think he should have been there. I still don't think he should have been armed. And, this shouldn't have ever happened. But from what I can read of actual, reading the law, I've got it up on my tablet, and watching the video front to back, I am convinced, and having watched, I think at this point, I think I've actually watched all of the trial to this point, I am 100% convinced he acted in self-defense.
Well, that's a pretty, to say 100% convinced.
Yes, I am
that's
100% convinced.
So there's not a shadow of a doubt that
No.
he was in imminent danger and deadly and bodily harm for all these situations.
Correct. I believe that he was in fact in serious, was being threatened with serious bodily harm.
So would you say then that in any situation where a person is threatened by an unarmed person and they lunge at you, under those stipulations, I can pull my knife out and stab you to death?
Correct.
Well,
okay, man.
I don't know that
you have the right.
Let's
That's
what happened, though.
Well,
That's
no,
what happened,
because
though, Nick.
Rosenbaum
You have the right.
Rosenbaum said, "If I get you alone, I will kill you." And then he gets him alone, and he's lunging, but he's not lunging for him. He's lunging for the weapon, which if he gets, he will no longer be unarmed. So if he has said, "I will kill you," if he has said, "I will cut your heart out and eat it," if he has been setting fires, tried to blow up a gas station, and then lunges at you, I would have. Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think you did not, in your scenario, add all those elements which had happened, and I don't think are contested.
Yeah, there's also a stature difference. If you look at the disparity of force between the two, just physically, if they were both unarmed, I don't have any doubts that Rosenbaum would beat the ever-living crap out of Kyle. Kyle's just kind of a pudgy 17-year-old, and Rittenhouse is much older, or Rosenbaum is much older, much stockier, and is probably, not insignificantly stronger than him. So the fact that Rittenhouse had the firearm and Rosenbaum didn't, well, if he didn't use the firearm to defend himself, then he was going to get severely beaten. So I do believe that he was, and the fact that and probably have the firearm completely taken away from him and then used against him. Beyond that fact, all Rittenhouse knows is somebody is firing a gun behind him. I don't believe that he knew whether Rosenbaum was completely unarmed or not. All he knew is somebody just fired a gun at my back, and that's when he turned around. So I don't, having watched the video through the whole thing, read Wisconsin's state statutes, I don't believe that he was breaking any laws carrying the firearm. I do believe that it was stupid of him to have done it, and I think that Wisconsin needs to rewrite their laws to prevent this from ever happening in the future, at least legally. And I am completely convinced that in all instances, for the people he actually shot, that is, that he was acting in self-defense. He is facing 2 charges of reckless endangerment with a deadly weapon, because when he fired at Rosenbaum, McGinnis was standing directly behind him, and he supposedly recklessly endangered him. That is something that needs adjudication. And he fired twice at the guy who kicked him in the face, missing him, and he was charged for reckless endangerment with a deadly weapon for those 2 rounds at that guy too. So those 2 charges may still be, in fact, be applicable, but the actual shooting of the people, I don't believe is.
I want to make sure we get Pat in.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I would disagree, just because most states do not allow minor. This is the issue: is your response appropriate and reasonable given the circumstances, right? Like the Jason scenario, I punch you so you stab me, is actually a perfect example of an imperfect self-defense, right? And so when this is the issue. It's going to be something for the jury to decide. Did Rittenhouse, after this, and first of all, you offered something into the fact pattern that's not present. By his own admission, Kyle heard a gunshot, but he had no idea if people were shooting at him or just shooting. Right?
Well, he said that.
Behind me, I heard a gun go off.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
Right? He heard a gun go off. He interpreted it as, I thought they were shooting at me. But that necessarily isn't make his justification. That just gives him a mindset that, hey, I'm carrying a gun and I hear gunshots, so I think they're shooting at me. That's what he believes to be the fact pattern. But whether or not that's actually what occurred is something for a jury to decide too. Is it reasonable in a riot when a bunch of people are carrying firearms for one person to hear a gunshot and determine that was shot at them when they don't actually see the directed action against them? This is the problem when you get a bunch of people in a place with firearms and one person isn't looking, but they hear a gunshot and they think, oh, they just shot at me. And then they react. Is that reaction reasonable given the totality of the circumstances and the situation? I mean, this is where, those with previous military and law enforcement training will understand, you're in a riot situation and you see someone shoot, you hear a gunshot, you just don't start shooting at everybody with a firearm.
Pat, you're so right.
But
in a combat zone, if you think the rules of engagement and escalation of force criteria are strict in a civilian setting with law enforcement, in a combat zone, it's so much more. I mean, we have to meet such a high criteria to be able to return fire.
But doesn't that apply then to the
but
guy?
Even civilians have a reasonable expectation to be appropriate.
The guy was going to shoot him, and he had the okay. There's bleed coming in from somebody here.
Someone's got the stream playing.
I mean, he was going to shoot him because somebody else said, "Hey, kill him." He just shot somebody, and that's why they were attacking him. He was running away. He was running towards the police. Everybody could see the police up in front of them. It seems to me that same rule must apply to them, right?
But wait a minute. But as an example, McGinnis didn't pull out his gun and shoot Rittenhouse because people were saying, hey, he just shot somebody. Nobody used deadly force on Rittenhouse to stop him. But Rittenhouse made the interpretation that he was being, that he heard a shot. He interpreted it as maybe a shot that was related to him and chose to engage with deadly force. And the other thing I wanted to mention is I know that I hear a lot of the issues of what was Rittenhouse thinking? Did Rittenhouse think that he was in imminent danger? Mm-hmm. That's a part of it, but I think it is a reasonableness question because you could be psychotic and think people are actually attacking you and feel he actually thought that I was jumping at him, but I wasn't, and he shot me. But because he felt that he was in imminent danger, he's justified in doing that. That's not reasonable. So while I think it's important to take into account what Rittenhouse's thoughts were in that moment, it's also, is it reasonable to think that a reasonable person in that situation would have felt that they were going to experience, deadly force or bodily harm, I should say.
If I could.
Yes, you could.
Yeah, if he's carrying an AR-15, he's got to expect that people are going to respond with deadly force. Sure.
Well, that's actually sort of where I was going to go.
Real quick, what I'd like to do, I'd like to give President Sunday a decent amount of time to introduce himself, say what he wants to say, because he's new. Want to make sure he says it. We're not going to be admitting anyone else into the stream until somebody bounces, because I don't want it to get bigger than this. I'd like to keep on this. Whatever he says, I'm sure we're going to have some discussion, and then I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes, get to some of the other questions about. What was it about the judge and about just vigilante behavior in general? If you guys are cool with that, you guys can go, but I think those are good questions. But I really want to make sure President Sunday gets a good chance to, and I know Simos wants to say something too, but let's let President Sunday give him some latitude here to catch us up on his views and what he wants to say. So thank you for joining us, and what's on your mind?
That's kind of you, thanks. Very quickly, I'm President Sunday. I run a YouTube channel that does political theory and stuff like that. Not super interesting, I don't recommend it.
But we'll drop a link anyway.
Thank you. So I didn't catch which one of you was bringing up the fact that him bringing that weapon to the protest was courting, again, that specific kind of interaction. But that's more or less where I was going to go with that. I don't think for the most part, anybody really seriously challenges the idea that he was indeed acting in self-defense once he was being pursued. People argue about whether or not it was legitimately in self-defense, in fact, or something along those lines. But I think by and large, the principal issue is that he was there in the first place with a firearm, again, courting the kind of interaction wherein he would have to use it. And I think what's very interesting here is that whether or not he was indeed acting in self-defense, the bare fact of him carrying that firearm there means that regardless of what kind of interaction he had, that now automatically becomes the most reasonable approach if he's forced to defend himself in any situation. So, like he says, he was just going around helping people with first aid and whatnot, which is a little bit strange given the fact that in the photographs he's walking around with his gun in front of him like this, no space to use his hands, and putting out fires. Okay, fair enough. Now, let's say he's putting out a fire. Somebody like Rosenbaum gets pissed at him for putting out a fire he's put on. If he doesn't have a gun, maybe they scuffle, maybe he runs away, maybe he gets chased and like something happens. If he does have a gun, which he did, then not giving like an accurate account of what happened immediately prior to that, that's the hypothetical. But if he gets pursued while having the gun, now suddenly him using the gun in self-defense is the most reasonable thing for him to do because he doesn't know what will happen to him. And at that stage, what are you going to tell him to do? Not use all of his powers to defend his life? He doesn't know that Rosenbaum has some like internal limit for how far he's going to hurt him once he catches him. The scary thing is that that was indeed the most reasonable thing for him to do in that circumstance once he was being chased in the dark. The issue is, again, just that he was there in the first place. I don't think it even matters whether or not he was doing it in self-defense. It's like he contrived a situation, consciously or not, wherein he would almost certainly have to grievously injure someone. So, like that I think is the culpability. I don't think for a second that he wasn't defending himself or that in that moment he didn't have a just reason to use his weapon. The question is, why was it the case that he had put himself into a situation where the most appropriate course of action would be to use a weapon on a stranger in public?
Well, there are a lot of people who do that. That's not. I have a hard time accepting or understanding that, but I've seen it. And then also this, because he did that thing where he said, "Well, it's my job to protect this." I was like, "That's not your job. That's not. I don't think. I don't know. No. That's not your job." So I think there are two issues. The first is, I can't believe. I mean, what did he tell his mother? Like, yeah, I'm going to get my AR-15 and I'm going to go out in the middle of these riots. It's been 3 days. It's riots. It's no longer a protest. It's riots. And I'm going to hang out there with an AR-15. And his mom says, "Sure, be back by dinner." I don't. So I'm curious to know where the adults were. But that aside, what does it mean based on his age? And B, let's assume that he was at least old. I mean, this is vigilantism, right? I mean, does he think he's Batman? The police weren't. The police seems to have encouraged this, I think, because they were feeling overwhelmed. I could be wrong. I don't know. Pat would be a much better person to answer how and why the police seemed to be encouraging and be okay with this. But it strikes me as once this is permitted, that's the breakdown of law in general. You really only have justice so long as there's an impartial police, or you shouldn't be empowering civilians this way. So, anyways, those are my thoughts. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, one thing that struck me, and I won't dominate the discussion after this, I promise. I'm so sorry. One thing that struck me as very strange is that when he described his initial encounter with Rosenbaum, in which he was threatened and told, like, if I catch, and again, like, I don't know if there was another witness that corroborated this, but as far as I'm aware, the only person whose word we have to take that is what Rosenbaum said is Rittenhouse, who is not exactly an impartial witness here. But okay, let's assume that's true. He claims that Rosenbaum told him that if he catches one of them alone, he will kill them. Okay, and lo and behold, it's been a little while since I've seen the footage, but I believe he was being chased while completely isolated in the dark with his firearm by a crowd of protesters. I don't know what he's doing. It's a little weird. And he's emphasized that they were only there. I'm so sorry. And he's emphasized that they were only there primarily to give out first aid and whatnot. Like, okay, but then why were you marching around in the dark by yourself without a sign or anything, with a gun in front of you held to all appearances like you're about to use it?
My understanding.
I just want to make one comment. Oh, sorry.
No,
so
you please.
This is the one thing I kind of want to step back from everybody here. I've been in my fair share of riots. This is the problem. there were a lot of firearms, and one of the things coming out in the testimony is how many times, and I'm just going to call them civilians. We shouldn't even designate which side of this issue they're on, but how many times firearms were pointed or implied use was given. First of all, carrying a rifle at port arms is tactically ready. You know, it's not this tactically ready, but it's tactically ready. It's not hanging slung. It's not like in a holster. People carrying a gun in a hand is a very different. Is it brandishing? In many states, no, and it wouldn't be unless you pointed at someone or using it in a manner that would be described as offensive and, you know, elicit in a response, right? So, but this is the issue. All these people were pointing guns at each other, but not a lot of people were shooting at each other. There are very few people shooting, despite the amount of firearms that were out there in this incident. So this is the old adage, you know, 500 guys on one side pointing 500 guys at the other is the one guy who shoots justified. Like the first shot. Like, I'm not saying that this is in Rittenhouse case, but this is something for a larger societal issue for us to look at. If everybody's armed and everybody is allowed to brandish a firearm in protection themselves, is that other person that being brandished at who's equally armed justified in using lethal force? Because pointing a gun at me is, I would say, a deadly intent act. But it was happening all the time at the protest. People were using firearms in a manner they say, well, it was a deterrent. Well, deterrents are only useful if you're actually willing to use them. But people were doing this on both sides. Well, they pointed a gun at us. We pointed guns at them. Did either one of you shoot? No. That tells you what was going on, this dynamic that was in play. And I'm not, again, I, as the ground commander of the law enforcement there, I would have had a hard time to say that we were in control of that situation when stuff like that was happening.
Yeah. I agree.
I think in addition to that too, like, you're in the dark, you're blind. You can only, like, we have the view from the camera, and we think people have that kind of clarity, but there's one camera that has Rittenhouse and the light being chased by Rosenbaum behind some cars where the shooting took place. There were fireworks or firecrackers going off. There are people shouting. What experientially, from the judgment of a member of the crowd, is the difference really between somebody actually firing a gun first and somebody standing with a gun in a ready position as you hear what sound like gunshots going off, at least to a layperson, in the dark? Like, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference out of hand.
I want to just bring up an analogy. You know, if it's one of the things I did recently is I rewatched the New York Times' coverage of their put together of the January 6th. I don't want to say riot, but like the attack on the Capitol, whatever the hell you want to call it.
I think insurrection you can call it by this point, but yeah.
Insurrection, yeah, fine. And I like, it's the first time I actually watched I watched 45 minutes of all the video all put together. And I didn't realize, like, it was just like a full on, I couldn't believe how violent it was. And when I watched that, it made me think, there was one person shot. Once they were inside they shot that one woman as she was trying to climb into the inner sanctum of like Pelosi's offices or whatever. But throughout the entire area, people are just going crazy attacking police, and not one police officer pulls out their gun and shoots them. But this kid is like, I'm in fear for my life because this guy chased me with a bag and lunged at me. So I felt like I was justified in shooting him. It kind of just made me think, is like, how is it that if that's an appropriate action, but nobody did that at the Capitol? It seems like like President Sunday, what you were saying, like the situation was such where this, and I know this may be not relevant, but this 17-year-old kid with not a lot of life experience, who's down at this protest with a gun that questionably he shouldn't have. You know, it's a straw purchase. I'm not sure if he could legally actually go around with it. How much action he's shot at one time in his life. He's probably never had any firearms training. You know, it's dark. You know, all these situations create a scenario. It's like putting yourself in a scenario, like a no-win scenario, where if you are put your back to the wall, you're not going to have an option but to shoot somebody. So I don't know what that means in terms of self-defense, but it just the situation was a really poor situation for this kid to put himself into.
Well, I guess the question of culpability then would be like, did he conceive that he would actually have his back put to the wall? And I have trouble imagining that he wasn't, again, fantasizing about some heroic situation where he has to fend somebody off and maybe finds himself in court like he did now.
I mean, yeah, I mean, think about it. Like all these guys, these 10 guys, they're like on the roof here of this building. They're here to supposedly protect these businesses. But my understanding is none of the businesses said, "I'm going to hire you to protect my business." I don't think any of them said, "I'm requesting you to do this." They just volunteered, I guess, to do this. So they're actually, like you said, they're like, they want to go down there. They're maybe subconsciously, implicitly, maybe explicitly looking for trouble.
I don't know if they're looking for trouble. Like, I think they probably had like this image of glory in their head where they're actually just saving people's businesses and saving people's livelihood, probably as a subconscious cover for just sheer spite for the protesters ultimately. But like, leaving that aside, like, I don't think a 17-year-old goes down there specifically to cause trouble. I think he has a delusory idea of what he's doing as being in some sense, like it's noble, he thinks. It's just grotesque irresponsibility on the part of the people who brought him down there.
I think there's some fetishization of the use of force, though. This is where I'm not going to be as charitable. I think a lot of those people went down there with the hope that they'd be given the opportunity to engage in self-defense, or at least brandish with, no real regard, show up in force and engage in, at minimum, hostile rhetoric, but engage in certain levels of vigilantism that would be passively condoned by law enforcement.
Did any of you hear about that Zoltanist figure who was in the news a few months, maybe it was last year, but he was that National Guard guy, like a reservist, I think, who had gone onto like Instagram or something and was really excited about the fact that they might have been giving them live ammunition to use on protesters. And there was a big scandal about that. Yeah, I know about him because early on my YouTube channel, I didn't know who he was at the time. He was like reaching out to me to try and like publish my stuff on a separate channel. Like, oh, sure, whatever, I don't care. And then I was like, oh God, it's you. There are definitely a lot of people exactly like that. And I think in particular, I don't know about Rittenhouse in particular. I have no reason to be this charitable, but there are those photographs of him. I think it was in a pub or something, and like he was giving the OK symbol in front of a camera. But the other person next to him, that OK symbol was upside down. So,
is that a gang symbol?
It's the white power symbol. When it's OK but reversed.
Yeah. I knew that, but when you said upside down, are you just saying
because this like OK is this, right? If you turn it upside down, it's a P. Yeah.
Oh,
so Peppy? If you have it down at your
white power, because your three fingers make a W, and then that's a P.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting because I seem to remember there was some testimony recently in this case where they had that guy from Real America testify, and the judge was like, "Don't bring up politics," and I'm like, "Wait a second. I mean, the political aspects are kind of inherently built into this case. I mean, maybe indirectly. But I just thought that was kind of interesting.
I'm actually, honestly, I kind of agree with the judge on that.
You don't think politics have anything to do with it?
No, I think it did. But I think it was proper for the judge to bifurcate that from the case. If they could prove the bias of that individual witness to the jury, that's different. But to just attack one side versus another and present this dynamic, I do think prejudices the jury because people have political views, right? And so part of your responsibility, both as a prosecutor and a defense attorney, although they're given more latitude in defense, is to not prejudice the jury unnecessarily. Either for
and
or
that's,
against,
that's rich and hypocritical coming from the judge who is obviously prejudicing the jury in his outbursts and his overt bias for the defense. Is he not?
I thought, I would agree with that somewhat. I mean, I think like some of these outbursts were not when the jury was in the room, but
right.
I would agree with you somewhat on that, Atheist Edge.
Well,
I think there's going to be. I mean, if the prosecutor may have to revisit the case, that's just the reality of it.
Well, what do you mean revisit?
He's jeopardizing he's putting the entire trial in jeopardy. It could be a mistrial because of this. The open bias towards the defense and against the prosecution, whether or not the jury's there at all, it's being televised. The court of public opinion is going to see that.
Well, but you only get one bite at the apple. I mean, even if the judge is biased. Yeah. Sorry, please.
Well, if the judge commits, like gross evidentiary, bad ruling. I mean, this judge has had stuff overturned before. This is problematic.
You can't overturn it.
He's limiting. He's policing. And he's policing the use of certain words, is he not? Like victims, rioters, protesters. There's certain words that the counsel are not allowed to say, even.
Well, I agree with the victims.
I agree with Nick. We can't overturn not guilty. That's Nick's absolutely right. But what I think will actually happen is I'm predicting a hung jury in this case. I don't think Rittenhouse will be convicted, but I do not see. Yeah, I don't think you're going to get all 12 to agree that what Rittenhouse did in each of those fact patterns. Remember, there's a lot of charges out there. Now, do I think Rittenhouse may come back guilty on one or two? I think there's a reasonable chance of that, and that will be the issue later. Is what happens? But I think there's also going to be may be a few not guilties, particularly with the Rosenbaum issue. But I do think there's going to come back with some. Hung juries. I think some people are. I think as the facts get closer and closer to the lesser included charges, I think that's going to be the problematic part of it.
I don't even know how a mistrial is declared. Like the judge himself has to declare a mistrial. Okay.
Well, somebody has to make a motion for it, and the prosecution actually asked for a mistrial and for it to be dismissed with prejudice, and they were denied.
They did.
But yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I
know the defense did.
I don't think the
defense.
I'm sorry. I said prosecution? I meant to say defense. My bad. Yes, the defense did.
My bad. Yeah.
But I do completely agree with you can't call them victims. You absolutely cannot call them victims. And the reason is, as soon as you call them victims, you are ceding what is at issue. That is necessarily, if somebody acts in self-defense, the person they shot is not a victim, period. They're not a victim. The victim is the person who's acting in self-defense. So the second you call them victims, you're assuming what's at issue. You're saying it's a tacit admission. Yeah.
Maybe, but I mean, perhaps the person acting in self-defense was operating under a misperception and was nonetheless still justified, right? Like if the person presented a threat, even if they weren't in fact an actual threat. Like I think is possibly being ambivalent again about the veracity of Rittenhouse's claims about Rosenbaum. That's possibly the case for Rosenbaum.
Oh, I completely agree. But the problem is, since the purpose of the trial is to find out whether or not he is guilty of murder, if you call them victims, then you are assuming on some level, just in the language, that he's guilty of murder, because if it was self-defense, they would not be victims.
Maybe I don't know. I think I mean, you can be a victim of an accident, right? I take your point. It definitely is evocative, but I don't think that necessarily is the only interpretation one can draw.
Well, I think you're making a good point here too. Which it's I suppose you can equivocate on victims because you're right. And somebody could be a victim of COVID and a victim of. So I think that's a good. I think in common. Here's the issue. I think the issue is jargon. In common English, I would completely agree with you, and we say victim all the time, and I refer to them as victims all the time because it's a lot easier than me coming up with something else. But if you're in a court, victim has a very specific meaning, and even though it may not to the jury, who will be speaking common English and won't be familiar with legalese, I tend to think that that's one you can't call them victims until it's over, because you're in a courtroom setting, and the word victim has a very specific meaning in that setting. I don't know, does that make any sense?
Yeah. Is it, if you don't mind my pressing, I'm not actually super familiar with this. Do you know out of hand if victim actually does have that specific content legally in that context, or is that just sort of from experience? You anticipate
just from experience? I don't have a definition.
Yeah. Yeah,
What was
many
that?
courts though, just so you know, there's a lot of case law on this. Like there's reasons the judge is ruling this way is because there's been a lot of case law that the use of what can be seen as prejudicial language to the defendant is, room for a mistrial. So the judge saying you can't use the word victim because it may elicit responses from the jury that's prejudicial towards the defendant. I mean, I've sat in a lot of courts where that's even in liberal California where that was the rule to, all witnesses, you will not use these terms when referring to the decedents or the deceased in this case. Now, I will tell you, depending on the fact pattern, it may or may not come in depending on how, the pretrial stuff goes. But in this case, the judges ruled, particularly when, Rittenhouse had made in the initial filings that it was very obvious from the very beginning they were going to be seeking affirmative defense they were going to seek the self-defense affirmation for so they're not saying that there wasn't a homicide. This is important to remember too. Kyle Rittenhouse isn't saying he didn't kill anybody. He's just saying he was justified in killing somebody.
Yeah.
But one point I want to make out is that I would agree with you. The term victim has a very specific connotation. And I think that the judge has some, there's some legal support in that statement. Fair enough. The issue, though, where this came up with is the fact that he's allowed them calling the other folks rioters and looters. And so what the perspective is that the prosecution's like, wait a second, you're letting them call them rioters or looters. He's like, well, maybe there's evidence, maybe not. I'm gonna let that go. You can call them rioters and looters. I'm not gonna make because that could be evidence, but we don't know. But that goes against the victim issue. And what this brings up, and goes to Atheist Edge's positions about topics around the judge. The judge has had some pretty biased perspectives in the past. And I'll give you one specific example of where he was on a case for a person who got convicted of stealing. And so he ruled that this person, she got convicted. He was like, every place that you go that sells stuff, you have to go to the management. And you have to tell them you're a convicted thief. Every place you go that's a condition of your parole or whatever, or of your service. You have to do that. And that got, I think it got appealed. So I talked to my wife about this. My wife's a psychologist, and her point was, like, some people were saying, well, that shows that he's biased towards the defense, and that he's more lenient, or that he's more harsh against the defendant. And he's not doing that here. He's more lenient to the defendant. But my wife's perspective is this shows an issue of bias. He's biased towards his own personal views of what associates closest with him. So when he's more associated with the defendant, he's going to side with the defendant. He's a little bit more biased. But when he was against the defendant, he threw the book at her. And so it kind of indicates that the judge may not necessarily be as impartial as you might think, given his history. And so yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. There's a bit of a lag on my end. I'm trying to talk over you really hard.
No, please go for it. Yeah.
You just made a really interesting point, actually. Rittenhouse is allowed to call the other people present rioters and looters and whatnot. But why do we reflexively make the distinction? Like, do we take Rosenbaum's sort of intellectual reasons for being present at the riot as part of a description of how we categorize him when he's there? Well, what I see with Rittenhouse is I see somebody who was there unlawfully menacing people with a gun during precisely the exact at the same event. Why do we instinctively refer to him as something other than a rioter? We don't make these sharp distinctions with respect to people who are not Rittenhouse in this case. And I mean, yeah, obviously, like, they were there because there was already something going on. Sure, fair enough. And as far as I'm aware, he is the only person at that riot who actually killed people.
Well,
and I would also.
Is it not the case that we're talking about when talking about descriptions of the people that are involved in the case directly, right, to do with the guilt of a person? So, and I think that might be some of the reason why rioters and looters is a general term used for the people around and not the specific people involved in the case, as well as victim as well on both sides. Is the one of the incident that I've kind of scene.
And
I think that happens
to
in
be
UK
fair-
courts as well. A judge will come down very heavily and very quickly on people using the language and using this kind of pejorative language, unless it's like a witness statement, and there is some leeway that the judges tend to give for individual language to be used. But it's certainly if it's expert witnesses or people that are representing the councils, then it's not allowed to use that kind of language.
Well, and I would I'm not, this is the last judge I'd want to defend, but I do think it's important to point out that when the judge said, let the pack fatter show what these people were doing and whether or not they can be determined to be rioters or looters, that's why there was so much, for those that watched the trial, there was so much argumentation over what Rittenhouse saw people doing, like lighting fires, doing this, committing acts of vandalism, to establish a fact pattern that at least some people were undertaking these activities, right? Not, and again, this is the difference when you're the defense. Like, again, I always try to explain to people in a court proceeding, they always think that the prosecution and defense are the mirror image of each other. No, the latitude given defenses is this. The latitude given prosecutions is this.
Yeah.
I always explain to people, the basketball hoop, like if you're playing basketball, the defense has like a small garden pool that they're allowed to use to score. And the prosecution has a standard size hoop. Right? And there's evidentiary rules and, latitude given, but that's the reality of, the judge has to allow the defense additional, in most cases, judges giving additional latitude is standard procedure of the court.
Yeah.
Because again, a robust defense, the assumption of innocence in our system is sacrosanct. So defense is allowed to get more latitude than the prosecution.
That's a good point.
The prosecution cannot intently and bias a jury. They have much more strict ethical standards, even for, they both have ethical standards, but prosecutorial ethical standards to get evidence admitted, what, rules, that they have to follow.
Well, but it's an issue because when we did our show, and I did mention that Rosenbaum has an extraordinarily vicious and violent history. And the reason I mentioned it was because I wanted to point out the fact that he really was, he was absolutely dangerous. But the question really isn't whether or not he was dangerous. The question was, what would Kyle reasonably be able to, would he reasonably think that he was in danger? But that history can't, to the best of my knowledge, hasn't been brought in, and I don't think it can be brought into this case because, again, it doesn't. Kyle didn't know it at the time. So the question is, did he know before you call them rioters or looters? Was there any way to know? Now, Rosenbaum had in fact set fires. Kyle was there for that. I think that qualifies rioter and looter. The rest, I don't know. Now, I do want to get an answer to that, but before I do that, I do want to play this. This is, I think it was 2 days ago. This is the judge receiving a phone call. This is not a joke. This is the judge receiving a phone call in court. I'm going to play it for you guys now. So hold on. Hopefully you guys can hear this.
The actions that I had talked about.
Very
done
quiet.
In bad faith.
We don't hear it.
You don't hear it.
You don't hear it? Okay, so let me pause it. It was very quiet.
What if you share it to the screen?
That's not a bad idea.
Well, the other thing too is I think you're discussing the ringtone, right, and the song.
Yes, the ringtone.
I don't know what it is. I never heard that.
Where it is.
Oh.
Yeah, give me one quick sec. So somebody answered my question on the or not. It wasn't a question, but I think I was highlighting that yes, there does appear to be a double standard. Although I think Pat's correct in the U.S. You err on the side of helping the defense is ostensibly what you're supposed to do. So and that's
I'll comment on that quickly.
Thank you.
I can't help but notice that despite his absence of a violent history, Kyle Rittenhouse, I believe, has killed at least 2 more people than Rosenbaum.
That's true, but Rosenbaum did rape 4 children and tortured one of them by setting him on fire, which strikes me as
what?
Yeah. He's a convicted sexual
man.
offender. He raped 4 boys between the age of 9 and 14. The mother found out about it when she found burn marks on the child and asked how he got them, and he was being tortured by Rosenbaum.
Jesus Christ. So no loss there.
So Rosenbaum, somebody said that he deserves a medal for killing Rosenbaum. I'm not going to go that far, and Rosenbaum had been released that day from a mental hospital. All right, you guys should be able to hear this now, and I've upped the volume, so let's play this one more time. This is court. This happened, I think, a couple days ago. The phone rings while I think it's the defense is talking. Let's give this a shot here.
The actions that I had talked about were done in bad faith.
So the judge is now checking his phone.
The actions that I had talked about.
That's his ringtone. I'm sorry. I know that's under any other set of circumstances I wouldn't bring it up, but really, really, that's his ringtone. I'm not.
What's the song?
That's God Bless the USA. That's the Trump rally theme that all the manga people. I'm not kidding. And this doesn't. You can't hang the judge on that. But just to add a little, just a little context to the discussion.
Okay,
that's his ringtone.
Okay, I've heard that before. Is that, like, to be fair? I don't know all these weird songs. Is that a song or like a rendition of it or whatever that was specific to the Trump rally, or is that just a song that happened to also be at the Trump rally? So if they sang "Amazing Grace" or something like that, and that was his ringtone, I'd be a little, like it would make me squint a little bit, but I wouldn't necessarily think that meant anything.
I've never heard anyone in modern times using that song outside of the Mango reference. It existed long before Trump. I mean, I forget who it wasn't that long ago, but it's some southern country. I think I wrote it, and it exists in other contexts, absolutely. But the Trump rallies are at this point the most common context.
I guarantee you that as an individual point in time, it's not demonstrable that it is inherently biased, but I believe given the totality of what has been observed in this proceeding, it is another piece of evidence to give at least a level of credibility to allegations of inherent bias by the judge against the prosecution and in favor of the defense in this case. But whether or not that'll be a fact pattern that's actually established, but I do think it's interesting given the other conduct we've seen.
He made the racist Asian statement.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Did you guys hear about that?
Yeah, I mean, I that's a tough one for me. It certainly did feel and sound racist, but I try to be very careful about those kinds of things. And I've seen all the usual on Twitter, plenty of people saying it's racist. And
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of Asian folks that have stepped out and have said this is like microaggression for Asian Americans, and I have no doubt. I mean, he said, "Let's hope for 1 o'clock." I don't know. The hope the Asian food isn't coming. It isn't on one of those boats in Long Beach Harbor, and I guess there's some statement of like a slow boat to China. That is like an Asian, an Asian, inappropriate Asian statement that denigrates Asian people. So one of the guys was saying it has some reference to that. When I heard that, I was like, I couldn't quite understand what the hell he was saying. Like, it was totally confused. But
I vaguely remember somebody talking about there being some kind of, jam or blockage in some shipping lane or something, and that was like a oblique reference to that. I don't know.
So, anyways,
okay, so as Nick's dad would say, these are evidentiary points that, in totality, may be indicative of a possible bias.
Yes,
he hated legalese. He'd say, "Yeah, in other words, we figured this guy out." That's actually what it'd say. He wouldn't say that to the jury, but that's what it'd say to me. Okay, so. Now, don't get me wrong though. It seems to me that the prosecution is screwing up. The prosecution has also screwed up a whole bunch. And most of their witnesses, they've had to impeach their own witnesses on the stand when their witnesses say things that help the defense more than them. Is that just me, or is that?
Yes, but this is another one of those issues with witness preparation that, let's just say, I watch witnesses pretty closely. I mean, I have some experience with it, and both sides, witnesses for the prosecution appear to be advocating for the prosecution. Witnesses for the defense are advocating for the defense. That's problematic. I mean, I will tell you, I remain completely unconvinced by Rittenhouse's testimony. Like, I'm unconvinced that it is not highly rehearsed and highly staged.
Including the
but that's the leeway he's given.
I think
not. I would say no. I would say that I don't. I think he was well prepped for the prosecution's cross, but I guarantee you that his answer, the questions he answered to his attorney were highly prepped. And again, if you want to say theatrical and orchestrated, I think that's fair.
I was paying very close
Again,
attention.
this isn't uncommon.
Yeah. Sorry. Please finish your sentence.
I think it's that. Yeah, they do this.
Okay, sorry.
Defense attorneys absolutely prep. They're supposed to do this, so it is common. Yes, President Sunday, please continue.
I'm Canadian. You'll have to forgive me for apologizing all the time. I was paying very close attention to his delivery, and one thing that really struck me was that the clarity and the coherence of the things he was saying didn't match up with the struggle he seemed to be exhibiting in locuting it. He's very clearly just a normal, not very bright 17-year-old. Is he still 17? 17, teenager, now. Whatever. Yeah. The only part of that I thought was actually him, and I have no idea whether to attribute this to a recollection of the event or just the stress of the situation, was the panic attack he had on stage. I think that was 100% real. But other than that, I didn't see anything even resembling an organic response to anything. It was because I would have expected stuttering. I would have expected something, but it was too fluid. He had clearly been practicing for months.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, what I'd like to do is I'm thinking right now maybe about a half hour left. I mean, if things are going great, we can keep going past that, but I also don't want to just go way past the point of. So I do want to hear Pat's take on the testimony of him crying, but we also have Oz in the back. So Pat, why don't you start that? I'll get Oz in, and we'll hear what he's got to say.
So I think it was a well-rehearsed, like I said, well-rehearsed. The only other place that you can actually see people cry and are totally audible is in theaters and on movies. Think about it. Where is it important to understand in either in film or in other media, particularly like drama, when someone's having an emotional breakdown, but you can hear and understand everything they say? Because we've all seen people in emotional crisis in our lives. What was that? Point. I can't hear you, right? But when in theatrical displays, I'm having a breakdown emotionally, and you understand everything I say because that's how we relay the information of the actor portrayal, right? It reinforces the visual with the audio. This is a technique that people that are professionals in this do. And when you start learning, one of the things when cops sit down, and particularly investigators are sitting down interviewing witnesses, we measure the vocal and physical responses to see if they're consistent with each other. Are you crying and sobbing? Are you sobbing but not crying? Are you crying and not sobbing? Now, and each of those data points isn't self-demonstrable of anything. It's kind of like in general, and that's one thing. Everybody's saying, "Well, they did this, so you absolutely know this." That's by the way, that's all propaganda that you see on TV. But there are some indicators that give you some reason to start cueing in on aspects of interview styles, responses, body language, different things like that. But it's not a science, by the way. It's more of a discipline of observation, right? You can correlate some things. It's not if they do this, they have to do this. He looked up and to the right, so he's lying. That you watch way too much TV. But these are indicative of, he was averting eye contact every time we got to these questions. So I think he's lying. Those are the kind of generalities law enforcement uses when we're interviewing people. But again, I was unconvinced, particularly the way he was very prepared for the questions that were asked. And I will tell you, the more often you give a story, the more credible you are, and you can elicit the response on cue that you want to emulate. I will tell you, talk to someone who's given the same story about an incident 100 times. They can do it. You know, you asked me about stuff I did that was, you know, highly dramatic at the time it occurred. I can give it calmly. I can give it with a lot of emotion because I've given it 100 times. So I can either tap into that wellhouse of emotion and bring it up, or I'll do it this time without any emotional response. Kyle, to me, Rittenhouse had that exact practiced ability. The fact that he maintained composure initially, he wasn't upset walking up. He was kind of cool cucumber. I mean, he was nervous, but you could tell he knew he was well prepared.
What, Pat, can I just ask Pat a quick question there in direct relation to what he just said, which is under cross-examination, how did you feel his emotional responses were? Because that's where I would expect that kind of stress to come out more.
So he knew what not to say. This is the problem with Cross. If you know, Cross is, I don't want to say it, but you know, the prosecution to do a good cross has to be able to trip you up from your previous statements. That's what cross is about, is to see if your earlier statements typically are consistent when asked from different points of view. Really good defense attorneys practice cross. So you're prepped on cross, but it was obvious that Rittenhouse cross was what he was nervous about. Whether or not but I think he was well prepared.
I want to push back a little bit on that.
But did he have that emotional response when asked the same questions or about
Sunday,
the same questions? That's what I'm trying to get to.
Write down your point, because I don't want you to forget it. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to quickly get Oz in here, just because he's right here.
Sure.
And
no worries.
Oz, how are you?
AFK.
Hear me?
Oh yeah, there you are. Hey.
Everybody doing?
We're doing good. How you doing, Oz?
The energy went down when I.
Well, everybody is hanging on every word you say or every long pause in between words while you try to get your audio sorted out. But we're hanging. Any thoughts, Oz? What's going on? How you doing tonight?
I'll switch to my computer.
All right.
Computer, it's my phone.
Perfect. Come back. President Sunday, you were saying.
Yeah, so I want to push back a little bit on that, because I would take your point. If indeed the outbursts that he had still permitted him to get his point across and made him look more sympathetic, yada. Sure. I want to push back on a couple of things. First, I think there's a big difference between him being upset by the testimony he's giving, and by like whatever associations he's making, like whatever he prepared, and the stress of being in court. And I think these are two separate things. We can't conflate them exactly, because it may be a radically different experience for him. I don't think he was faking that outburst, even if I think most of his account was bullshit, and I really do. As someone like who has like dealt with like extreme panic attacks in a crisis situation before, that looked 100% legit. If that was fake, he is the best actor I have ever seen, because he was choking. You could see it like visibly, and he couldn't speak. And he didn't look sympathetic to me. He looked like he was breaking down under pressure. I have a lot of trouble believing that aspect of his testimony in particular was fake. Now, maybe it was itself the product of the pressure he was under, making a delivery that he knew was bullshit. So I don't know, but I don't think his breakdown was artificial. I think that was very sincere. I think it was maybe the only sincere thing he did.
But that's why I wanted to know about Cross and what you thought about his emotional reaction to the Cross was, because under those circumstances, he's not prepared for the questions. And I would expect somebody who is under such stress about questions that they've already know that they're going to answer, have already answered, have been prepped to answer those questions. If they're getting stressed about those questions, then surely questions which they don't know are coming are going to trigger them even more. And so that was my main point. What did you guys think about the Cross, about his emotional response and the stress levels that he went through during that period.
I caught only a piece of the cross, and it was amazing how well he appeared to be controlling the DA during the cross. So the DA was asking about the gun, and had said, "Well, so how about this rifle? And you got the rifle?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "So did you get the license?" "Yes, I had the license." "Well, you're aware that the license doesn't apply here." "No, sir, it works this way." He said, "Well, are you sure about that?" "Yes, sir, I'm sure." He seemed to know more about the law. And then he said, "Well, do you really think that you should be allowed to have the AR-15 and not a pistol?" And it's just like, that's the law. It's just like he's arguing, over, and the kids seem to know the law. And then he said, "Well, you know that you're supposed to apply for a full license after. Is that correct?" He said, "Yes." Did you apply for that full license?" "Yes, I did." "Have you gotten that full license?" "No, I haven't." "Well, why haven't you gotten the full license?" "Well, because when you charged me, I was no longer capable of getting the license, and I was disqualified." It was like, oh, ouch. And it's like, and it's out because this is the DA. He walked right into that. But anyways, that was what I saw, and so what I saw was the DA getting controlled by an 18-year-old. I did see him crying. I saw a lot of those highlights. I didn't see what precipitated it, so that's the extent of my knowledge of the cross.
No, well, that to me that makes Pat's hypothesis more likely then.
I got the sense I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Jason.
I'm just real briefly, my sense of the cross-examination was that the prosecution was feeling the hands of the judge on him. That that there are multiple times where the judge is like, "Stop, leave," chastise the judge. Like as soon as he started the cross-examination, he was going to, like, the judge chastised him about the right of the defendant to be silent. And I didn't quite understand why the judge was chastising him, but he was trying to ask him about did you witness, did you watch videos? You had the luxury of looking at the videos and listening to interviews. You had the luxury of sitting and here in court and listening to the testimony. And as soon as he started doing that, the judge is like, "Stop," and then he did that multiple times. And I feel like that the prosecutor wanted to take the gloves off and go at the defendant more, but I feel like the judge wasn't going to let that happen. So I feel like kind of threw the prosecution off a little bit. I would agree with you. I mean, but I'm not quite sure if I got the sense that the defendant was like manhandling the prosecution. I don't think that was the case, but because I think he stepped in it a few times, but he certainly was well coached. I would say that.
Well, yeah, and that's part of the prep. But I would go so far as to say that when I wouldn't call it manhandled, but this is where prosecutors, he was not prepared. The fact you don't know whether or not Rittenhouse applied, you never, as a prosecutor or a defense attorney, you never asked a question that you don't know the answer to, and he didn't know the answer.
Well, did he or did he not? What was the question? Was, did you apply for a permit or? He knows.
It doesn't matter, right? Because even if he knew the answer, which was yes, he did, he had to have known the follow. He didn't know the follow-up, which was why didn't you get it?
Right.
He applied after he had. No, wait. Okay. My understanding is that his application.
He applied before,
but after the event.
Yes.
The event, he killed the guys. Then he applied for he didn't apply before the event.
He was required by law to apply.
The issue.
So it was the prosecutor was trying to. Yes, please.
Go ahead.
No, basically, he transported a gun in. He had a right to carry it out of state. This is the issue. He applied for the permit after the shooting, as required by law, and then he didn't get it. And the prosecutor, rather than knowing, So there's reciprocity between states for possession
Right.
of, like, because remember, he'd been to a hunter safety course, but it was an out-of-state hunter safety course. He had applied, so these are the issues. He, within a certain amount of time of having transported a gun within the state, he is required to provide a permit within that state, right? This is how reciprocity goes. You have a certain amount of time after entering a state to get in accordance, in most cases, with that state's laws, right? So I'm a resident of the state of Washington. I moved to Idaho. I have a certain amount of time to get, quote unquote, get my stuff squared away before I'm in violation of law of Idaho when it comes to the possession and ownership of firearms if they're state requirements.
Maybe I'm just not totally clear about like the circumstances. 'Cause my understanding is that like there was a straw purchase. The gun stayed in Wisconsin. He wasn't living in Wisconsin, but the gun was in Wisconsin. He wasn't allowed to take the gun with him. He wasn't allowed to do that because like he's not allowed to have that gun in Illinois, right? And then,
well, when you're using the word straw purchase in a way that doesn't apply to when family members buy family members' guns.
Well, he's not a family member.
Let me interrupt real quick. I do want to have Pat. I do want to have Pat explain, but I want just because I think where the misunderstanding is, what the goal of the DA was in this case was to show that he was disingenuous. That Kyle had no intention of following the law and following through with his obligations post hoc to get the license, because he'd already gotten the hunting license, but he had to get a full license after that. So like, but you weren't really trying to do that, were you? Oh, you were. Well, yeah, but you didn't finish the process, did you? Because you didn't really want to get a license. You just wanted to have the. Oh, you couldn't finish the process because I stopped you. Oh, so that's essentially.
Wait. Wait. Yeah, but
that's what I'm arguing.
Okay, but the prosecution didn't stop him. He stopped himself when he killed those people.
But
like
it
he killed
sounds
those
like
people.
But it sounds like the way he allowed Kyle to frame it. He handed it to Kyle because Kyle's like, you're the one who stopped me by bringing these charges. And it's sort of like, and he's got no response to that, because what he was trying to do was he was trying to frame Kyle as someone who wasn't following the law when in fact he was. And then he thought he had him because, oh, you didn't get your license, did you? Yeah. Well, why not? Well, because you brought charges.
Right. That terminated my application. You guys, it was really nice meeting you, President Sunday.
He literally just.
But I would be more than willing to talk about. Yeah, I'd be more than willing to talk about vigilante justice. Just kidding, because I think that's really what this case should be about. Oh, and one last thing, with all due respect to President Sunday, Rittenhouse's breakdown couldn't have happened at a better point.
Oh, really?
In his testimony. Think about when he broke down.
He broke down right at the time when they were getting ready to take a break. Is that what you're saying? Like there was a break coming up. They're like, wait a second.
Also what he was discussing.
Oh, yeah, gotcha. Yeah. I mean, definitely, I'm
scared.
I'm sure the defense was like, look, if you happen to get emotional at this point, that would be a good point to get emotional. I mean, they can have that conversation. I mean, they could be like, look, if you get emotional during this point right here, that's not a bad thing. Like if you feel emotional, let your emotions out. I'm sure they talked about that.
Well, let me do a couple quick things. Let me do a couple quick things. So
I'm still unconvinced that it was entirely organic. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I give you. I agree.
So let's keep the conversation going maybe another 5 or 10 minutes. I do, Titan, if you could do me a huge favor and drop a link to Nate's channel, Nate the Lawyer. He's been good enough to let me come on to his streams when he's been covering this, and he's a lawyer. He's a former district attorney or assistant district attorney for New York. He's a former police officer, and he's teaches law, and he watches this and does commentary, and every now and then he lets me go in and play the part of the clown, which is a lot of fun. So he's but he'll be covering it Monday, and if you want to see a lawyer, an actual lawyer who is commenting on this as it's happening, and he'll also often have on other guest lawyers with him. He does a pretty good job. So hopefully Titan can drop that in for me. If he can't, I'll be able to get it in a couple of minutes. But that he'll be covering it Monday, and he's been covering it, and I really appreciate the job that he's been doing. I also there was one other quick house cleaning thing. Oh yes, Pat. I would like to chat with you on Discord because we've had this conversation. I have at least one show I would like you to come in on for in time. So I'm hoping you can still do that. And now we have two. Just because the police reform show. But if not, no worries. But let me know. We'll discuss it on Discord. I wanted to. All right. So having said all that, where were we? Let's just we can still wrap this up. I don't know if Simon has anything else to say, but it sounds like we're on the same page with the. What is it with the SmackDown? The DA just seems to not have their ducks in a row, and they've been misstepping. I mean, they've had to impeach their own witnesses. They asked Titan, we need your attention, please. So what we what was I going to say, Jason?
I don't have it. I don't have it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I didn't really have any comments other than, I probably would agree that the prosecution hasn't done the best job, and that he certainly, I think that, again, there's probably some issues with the judge related to that, but the prosecution probably could have been better prepared. And it's not just the main prosecution, the main guy. There's other guy that he's got, I think, hasn't done the greatest job, and particularly today they were talking about lesser charges. I don't think he did a very good job of that. The defense seemed like they were running roughshod over them, and the judge was ruling left and right, like, okay, I'm not gonna talk to the jury about this, and I'm not gonna talk to the jury about that. So I think they kind of blew it there too. So. But the only other thing I would say is I probably would agree with Pat that I think this is probably going to be a hung jury. I'll bet there's at least a couple people on there that are like they're not going to vote not guilty. But I'll bet that there's a majority on there that will vote not guilty. So my prediction is they're going to go into the jury room. And the only thing I would say is that I was actually on a manslaughter jury one time, and it was like the first case of in California of a hate crime. And I can tell you that when I went into this is anecdotal, but when I went in the jury room, I was like, I think this guy did it. There were all kinds of people in there that were like, oh no, he didn't do it. He didn't do it. But me and like several other people were like, I'm not changing my mind. And it got hung. My prediction is it's going to be a hung jury. There are going to be a few holdouts. They're just going to be like, I'm not changing my mind. And I think it's going to be majority not guilty. There'll be a few that think he's guilty, and it'll get hung. That's what I think. So,
all right, Titan just dropped Nate, the lawyer. Thank you.
I think several things he'll be found not guilty.
You think what?
I think some of the lesser charges. I think on murder.
Oh,
I think he's not going to be found guilty on any of it.
You think he'll be not guilty on
a couple of the lesser included? But I think there's going to be a lot of hung. I think there's going to be some not guilty, and there's going to be like one or two lesser included that he's found guilty of.
You think he's going to be not guilty on the most severe charge? Wow. Okay. I don't think so.
I agree with
I think
Pat.
it's going to get.
I think it's going not.
I think he's going to get hung. I think he's going to get hung on the most serious charges, and he's going to be found guilty on some lesser charges. So maybe I'm a little. I'm looking at the a little bit more that the prosecution didn't do as bad a job as we think, but that's what I think.
If I could just maybe just move it on slightly, which is to bring up the vigilante point, which is it's horrifying, absolutely horrifying to me that people think they can go in and do the job that the police should be doing, right? Bearing in mind that it takes a long time to train to be a police officer, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of horrifying for me. Yeah, well, okay, that's just maybe, but it seems strange to me. And then also, not just that people can go in and then try to do the job of other professionals, like medics, etc., and think that gives them some kind of, and this is the point I'm making, and it gives them some kind of authority in that situation more than just an average citizen, because as I say, police are trained individuals to handle difficult situations, etc., whereas obviously members of the public are not going to be trained in that way, even if they are trained in the use of weapons or whatever. There's so much more to being a police officer than just that, so it's extremely worrying from my side that people think that gives them some kind of leeway to act in a particular way. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah,
That's the part that bugs me the most. And let's hear Pat, because he's going to say something much more salient.
Well, I was just gonna say, just because you've like watched some, CSI and played Call of Duty, doesn't really mean you're mentally and intellectually and physically prepared to do stuff like that. I'm really worried about vigilante justice. I'm also worried about the predisposition law enforcement has to groups that are leaning right, because law enforcement generally leans right, and for that reason, this is problematic. And the fact that, again, I just, this, let's just take Rittenhouse out of this, but you're an officer in a riot skirmish line, heavily armed and armored, people walking in and out of your line because they're allowed to carry firearms, right? Because state law permits it. But you see a kid looking at like Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse in those pictures, to me, looks like a 17-year-old kid.
Yeah.
No cop on that side thought, why is there a kid walking into a riot with the AR? Like, why didn't someone say, hey, get over here, check his weapon, check him? Because I'll tell you right then, at minimum, they could have seized the weapon because he wasn't lawfully allowed to possess, or at least possibly wasn't lawfully allowed to possess it, right?
I mean,
like, no one was checking anybody. I mean, and the reality is like, well, you're allowed to carry a firearm, right? I guess that's what we're going to default to. But walk down a major city tomorrow, anywhere where it's legal to carry a firearm, and see whether or not the cops stop you when it's one of you. Problem was, there were hundreds of people carrying firearms, so law enforcement had no ability to, engage in something that would have been, ideally public safety.
I can't imagine a 17-year-old getting checked by a cop for his ID and with an AR. The cop's not going to be like, wait a second, you can't be having this weapon here. Like, you're 17 years old. You can't be walking down the street with an AR. Now, I don't know what the specific laws are in Wisconsin. I mean, I guess, is it like, if he's hunting, he could have that gun if he's like 16 and up? Is that what it is?
And completed a hunter safety course.
No, he has to complete
that. Is the issue, the hunter safety course. That's
he has to complete the course, and then he can own it. Now, it's implied that, of course, he's getting it for hunting, and he uses it only for hunting. It doesn't say that. That is not in the law. So he was relying on the fact that once he's got it, the law doesn't say he can't carry it with him. So any strict interpretation of the law, he's in the clear. Just by a strict interpretation of it, he's in the clear.
What if you're 12 years old?
It only applies to over 16. You had to be over 16 in order to get 16? The license, and I think there may have been another age limit. But there was a lot of laws there, but I think that section applied to 16.
And just so you guys know, Wisconsin's not abnormal. This is pretty common in every state that there is like a junior exception to possession of firearms for the purposes of hunting. I mean, when I was a kid, I was 10 years old hunting with my dad in possession of a firearm, but in California, I had to go through a hunter safety course and be within the proximal supervision of my parent. That was it. I carry a firearm. Go hunting. Go hunting ducks with my dad.
You say for the purposes of hunting, okay? Like that just doesn't mean anything, right? That's the point. You can't go to a riot with a rifle for the purposes of hunting.
Like Nick was saying, it doesn't say anything about that.
Yeah, it doesn't say that in Wisconsin.
Right. I was talking specifically about California. Yeah. Well, but this is the issue. Once I got to be 16, the old law in California, which has subsequently been changed, I could throw my shotgun in the back of my car and go duck hunting.
I mean, technically, under this situation, the fault lies with the lawmakers who made this law so vague that allows a kid who's 17 years old to possess a gun and walk down the street in a riot, and then when he gets confronted, he kills somebody, and they're like, "Whoa, we didn't." I'm imagining what's going to happen is they're going to change this law.
Oh, yes.
There's going to be some. There's going to.
No.
You don't think so, Pat?
Jason, I fundamentally disagree with your analysis. The problem isn't the law. The problem in the United States is gun culture.
Oh, that's the big.
Well, but
what he did was not seen. What he did was not seen extreme.
Yeah, but this is a reflection in our politics. Like, so the fact that it's the gun culture is reflected into the politics. The reason that there is no that the law is vague is because that culture has influenced those elected officials.
Take Rittenhouse being 17 out of this. The fact that we have an adult in a state like Wisconsin, and lots of states have laws like this, can walk around in public carrying a firearm just because they want to, and then have the right to take that firearm someplace and engage in protection of life and property, not their own. And that's, this is really the gun culture issue. And I don't mean gun culture. This is, okay, I shouldn't say gun culture. This is that part of gun culture that fetishizes gun ownership.
Yes.
Right. This is that, again, they can have my gun when they pry it from my cold dead hand. Right. This is that kind of mentality. I will tell you, it's very right. And it's very supported by law enforcement. I will tell you, law enforcement loves the right until they're pointing guns at law enforcement. Then they get different attitudes about it.
I totally agree with you.
Usually well armed, by the way.
I totally agree with you. The only facet that I was thinking of is when I see all these people with weapons, and frankly, maybe it's because I'm old, but they all look like kids to me. Like even like that Grosswitz guy, he's like 28 years old. I'm like, how much training does this kid actually even have? He's running around with like a Glock 26, and he's like, I gun keys in my Glock. I'm like, what the fuck? Is everybody armed at all times? Like 18-year-olds running around with weapons, pumped up with testosterone, no life experience. Like, frankly, if it was a 40-year-old man with a weapon there, I have a feeling the 40-year-old man, I just honestly think they're more likely to be like, wait a second, I shoot this person, I'm going to fucking jail. This guy's rushing me. The last thing I'm going to do is pull my gun out and shoot this guy. Cause you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do whatever I can to prevent that from happening. You know why? Cause it's going to come down on me. I'm going to go to jail. There are going to be repercussions. I don't know if this kid actually is thinking, you know what? I pull my air out and shoot this guy, I'm going to go to jail. I don't think he was thinking that. I think he was too young to, I hate to say it, but like he just young and dumb.
But he doesn't. Look, he hasn't even developed consequence. You're not fully the prefrontal lobes aren't developed fully until you're between 22 and 24 years old. So he doesn't even understand consequences as well as developed adults. So he's, the other thing that I'd hope the adult would realize is if I'm wrong, or right or wrong, if whoever I'm pulling the trigger on, their life is over. They may be a parent. They may have kids. They're certainly somebody else's child. And these are all the things that an adult is going to think about. Now, if you have to do it because it's you or them, you do it. But none of those things entered Rittenhouse's mind. He doesn't have enough life experience to sit there and just realize that that this is not. I was about to say that this isn't a video game, and I hate the idea of saying that because I'm not trying to suggest that video games or what, but this is, he still sees life in black and white. He still sees, I'm the good guy, so I'm always going to win. I'm the good guy, so as long as my intentions are pure and I'm in front of this thing with my gloves on and my kit and my gun, everything's going to be fine. No, he could have died that night, and that never even crossed his mind, really. It didn't cross his mind. This was just, he's going out there for the glory of it. And, adults are less likely to do that, I think, but we still see plenty of them doing it. And I think that's what Pat was saying. That's the culture that's a real problem.
Pat's chomping at the bit here. Okay, go for it, Pat. Give us your opposite view.
Again, I'm still just surprised that there are only 2 people killed, given the amount of guns and the amount of the witnesses are all talking. All the armed and unarmed people were talking about how all these groups were pointing firearms at each other.
Oh,
now remember, this is a riot.
Wait a second.
So,
wait. All these guys. It's not like all these guys on one side had guns and the guys on the other side had guns. It was like a bunch of guys on one side had guns and nobody else really had guns. How many people had guns on the other side?
Well, there were guns on the other side.
Well, nobody was running.
there was testimony that some of the we'll call them the protesters, right? They had firearms on them,
and they had AR.
Right? So what happened is they
really
right there were armed contingents on both sides. Now I will call them the counter protesters were more heavily armed. That yes, but this is the problem. You had protesters and counter protesters armed in a riot.
Yeah, that's true.
And this is to me the fact that only 2 people died. Right. It's like, let's get gasoline and pour it on open fire and see if it smothers it.
Yep. You're right.
You know as well as I do that again, and understand this is a scene where law enforcement, because the law is such that, well, we can't stop you. Understand there was a curfew too. Like all this stuff that is ancillary, law enforcement forms a containment.
That the police were trying to, found the didn't have enough numbers to contain the situation as it is, so therefore the perimeter is the second best option.
So yes and no. So you never have enough bodies to do what you need to do the right way. That's just the reality. If I need 3, I could use 5. If you use 5, you can always use 7, right? But law enforcement has, in the last 40 years, really changed its attitude. Everybody goes, well, the cops are just standing by and watching as people burn a building. Building's property. So, in some cases, law enforcement will engage for the protection of property, but, it's a totality of the circumstances. I'm a tactical team commander. I got 25 guys and ladies in law enforcement that I'm going to engage this crowd of 200. We're pretty well I shouldn't say pretty well trained. Some are pretty well trained, others not so much. But you're trained to handle situations like this. So you triage incidents like this. In many cases, the perimeter is the best model for containment, right? But in some cases, cops are trained to go in and extricate, nucleated groups out of. You've seen that, where cops will rush into a group and, pull out the worst offenders, right? That's something I've done a lot. It's just, the issue is whether or not, like this is where it gets really weird. When rounds started going off, what happened? What was law enforcement doing? Right? They kind of, you don't get a lot of reaction out of them. There is video from the time where you can hear gun and there's nothing they can do. You are, and this is where I really want to caution my liberal friends. Okay. Protesting's great, but law enforcement often overreacts, A, due to disposition, B, training, and C, their own perceived fragility of control. As outraged as you are at what happened on January 6th, that's every cop's nightmare. They lost control of a riot at the Capitol. And now we go, oh, look at how crazy that group was. Law enforcement doesn't often distinguish between right and left, and when they do, they lean right. So you need to remember that. So just for future reference.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You can do protesting? Yeah.
Well,
lots of background noise. I think it's from you, Nick, but I'm not certain.
So yeah, maybe. Sorry. All right, let me see if I can deal with that. Well, what I'm going to do, I'll mute. But what I wanted to do is let everyone do an outro and wrap it up. Say, tell people where they can find you, and also, any last thoughts on the topic or what we've been discussing tonight. I really do want to thank all of you for coming. I think it's been a great discussion. So really, thank you guys so much. And so let's start with Jason.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I like talking about the Rittenhouse case. I think it's very relevant and indicative of what's going on in our society right now. So it's nice to have those discussions, because I think it relates to the problems that we're experiencing, particularly in the last few years with the Trump administration and our issues of diversity and inclusion and how that relates to these topics. I think that's interesting. So I guess my just real brief wrap up is that, like I already mentioned, I think it's gonna be a hung jury on some of these more serious counts. I think he's gonna be guilty on some of the lesser accounts. And I think that there could potentially be other ramifications in terms of appeals if he's found guilty. And I think people are going to be pointing to this case like the OJ case. They're going to be dissecting it, looking at what went wrong, what went right. Oh, and the other thing is that regardless of what happens, there's likely going to be there's going to be a civil suit. So they're going to be civil suits by these people that got died. Their family members are going to sue Rittenhouse. So it's not going to be over for him. If he gets off, he's going to face civil cases, and the preponderance is going to be it's a lower threshold. So he could just be like OJ. He could be found not guilty, but he could just owe a shitload of money for the rest of his life. So,
but I think they've talked about suing the police. I think there may already be suits against the police that have been starting based on all.
Oh yeah, yeah.
All right, well, perfect.
Wouldn't doubt it. So, anyways.
Yeah, okay. So I just want to say thank you for having me on, Nick. So appreciate that. We were joking about it today. So when I saw you were doing the show and it was an open hangout, I thought, I've got to come on. But it's interesting to hear your diagnosis about this particular case, because I think it is important, not just for America, but it's important for people to see how this the idea of vigilante and the idea about the amount of control police actually have in the society is an important one. And, we face some similar dilemmas over here as well about the rule of law and how it's perceived amongst our certainly younger population versus older population, which seems to be some kind of issue. Then the second point is it's really good to see Atheist Edge again. I'm really happy that he's getting fit by getting out there, and I've been watching his videos on disc golf. So thank you very much, Jim. Hopefully we can chat about that sometime. Nice to see Pat again as well, and I hope the archaeology is going great and you'll be back in the UK soon, and if so, hopefully we will be able to meet up at some point. Other than that, I'm doing a show with Fabio, of course, on Monday to do with the Brazilian Grand Prix, but also it will be entailing Italian politics for you there. So if you're interested in politics Italian style, then please come and listen to Fabio and myself argue the toss about absolutely nothing important. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you again for coming. And then, Pat.
I just want to say thanks for having the stream, Jason and Simos, as always, and everybody else. It was great talking to you. I give my based on my experience, my training, but again, this is I just want to kind of put last thing to think about. If you live in a city of 50,000 people, you may have a police department of anywhere from 25 to 50 people. Think about that. So when Simos asks how much control does law enforcement have, they have that much control that society actually gives them. Because in a chaotic situation, law enforcement has very little actual control. They have control because incremental control, right? We can control a bar fight. We can control or react to the liquor store being robbed. But when society fundamentally breaks down, how much control does law enforcement actually have? That's something I think people need to remember that.
Well,
apocalypse.
Yeah, well, no, it's apropos because, and I had mentioned this and we didn't quite discuss it, but of course, the National Guard has now been empowered for starting Monday going forward, because if Rittenhouse gets off, which I don't think anyone here or that I've spoken with really thinks he's going to get found guilty. So it's either going to be a mistrial or he's going to get off on at least the larger charges, which is what I'm leaning towards. Actually, well, I'm about 80% on that, I think, is what's going to happen. So that's gonna make for an interesting week next week. So anyways, I hope you guys will come back next Friday. So again, every Friday, 10 p.m. we do this, and I think there may be more to talk about, but or who knows, we may find something else. But I really appreciate it. I think all of you had some insight. I'd like to thank President Sunday, who came on, and it was nice to see him. Also, Jim, of course, and Oz, even though we lost him, but I appreciate the effort, and I look forward to seeing all of you. We're going to have Arden of Eden is going to be our guest for this coming Tuesday. It looks like the show is going to be actually much earlier. It's going to be 2 p.m. Eastern Standard, but we're going to be talking to her about trans issues and how it applies to her personal life and her work. She has the call-in show at the ACA, and I think that's going to be a worthwhile discussion. But until then, hope everybody has a marvelous weekend. Thank you again for joining us. If you've gotten this far, please do like and subscribe. It really does help us out with the algorithm. And again, we did that previous show. If you like that show on what happened, pass that around and show that to people, because I'm proud of that, and I think we did a pretty good job covering it, and I think that that's a great way for people to get an understanding of what we're talking about. My name is Nick Suter. Thank you all for joining us, and we will catch you on Tuesday.